Retirement Board. We start off each meeting with an introduction of who is in the room. So we'll start with the trustees' names this way and then just circulate around the room.
Trustee Jason Lehman.
Trustee Catherine McLeod.
Trustee Jennifer Cooperman.
Trustee Elizabeth Fouts.
Trustee Brian Hunzecker.
Lauren Counthauer, outside legal counsel for the fund.
Thank you.
David Short, retired Deputy Chief Fire.
Alan Kirkwaller, President of Firefighter Association.
Nelson Hall on behalf of Fire Excellence.
Olivia Walkman, attorney with Public Safety Labor Group.
Jim?
Jim Lanzarada, partner with Moss Adams, CPAs.
Keith Siegelbeck with Moss Adams.
Stacey Jones with Fpdr.
Franklin Richard City Attorney's Office.
Kimberly Mitchell at Fpdr.
Val Fouillot, retired Police Officers Association.
Bill Stevens, retired Deputy Chief, Fire Department, and I'm now the President of the Retired Firefighters Association.
Joe Jankowski, retired Police and Fire, and testifying on the board.
Melissa Gentry,
Judith Barber, Fpdr. Matt Maury, Vice President of Portland Firefighters Association.
Colin Beeson, General Health, working with Portland Fire.
And in the back?
Pat Dooley, retired fire.
Kathy Honeysuckle, Fpdr.
Great.
Hutchison, Bureau Director.
Great. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for being here. We have a few more people than normal, so thank you for the few extra minutes it took to go around the room. Welcome back from the holidays, and we're ready to get started. We offer a public comment period. Did we have anyone? Oh, wasn't on my list. Okay, yes, we can approve the minutes from the prior meeting. They were distributed. Does anyone have any comments or questions or corrections to the minutes? Seeing none, do I have a motion to approve the minutes from the last meeting?
I'll make a motion we approve the minutes as presented from the last meeting.
Second?
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, minutes are approved. Thank you. Do we have anyone signed up for public comment? Nope, thank you. There are no action items that are on the agenda, so we'll move into the informational items per the agenda. The first is a request of Mr. Joseph Jimkowski to address the Board of Trustees.
First, I want to thank the board for this opportunity to allow me to come here and speak to you. Some of you don't know me, some do know me, and after this presentation, you'll know me a lot better. I'm going to read off my presentation here, and I just felt that it's easier to do that. And as I do that, I have a handout for you folks here. Whatever I'm saying is in this handout, plus additional handout for you related to Oregon law, the boards, and ethics, and so on. And I'll read it off to you. I'll read it off there. The handout I have here at the end is going to be the insert to my speech. It'll be some information about ORS 237, House Bill 2280, and OAR 459, equal to or better for Oregon PERS. In there you'll have an Fpdr disability form and the Fpdr service pension form. There'll be an Oregon government ethics and Portland Code of Ethics in there for board members.
It says the speaker's mic is off.
Could you pull the mic a lot closer to you?
Sorry.
And if it's got a green light on, we're ready to go.
Okay, got it. Is that on?
I don't think so.
I think it's working. I see a green light.
There it is. Now, I'll start again then. I want to thank you for the opportunity to allow me to speak to you today, and that after this presentation, I don't know you, but after the presentation, you'll know me a lot better. You'll understand a lot more about my daily life and monthly life. I do have a handout for you at the end, and I'll read the table of contents here. There'll be the presentation that I'm reading today. It's about 2 pages. I'll read it pretty quickly. Next, there's some ORS 237, House Bill 2280, and OAR 459, equal to or better than Oregon PERS. And also there's a FPDR disability pension form, FPDR disability service form, distinguish between the two. There'll be Oregon government ethics laws and Portland Code of Ethics laws. In there, there'll be an Oregon membership handbook for boards and commissions. for the state of Oregon. It covers all the rules and laws for boards to operate under. And the next will be a PERS, police and fire classification, which is something that I learned about the past few months, but which I'll explain in my presentation here. But there's over 10,000 Portland police and fire PERS, police and fire classifications that are not police officers in the state of Oregon that get police and fire disability and retirement. If they're injured on a job, they get a disability retirement, but not one Portland firefighter gets a disability retirement in a line of duty injury. And that's important because we're supposed to be equal to or better, yet, example, the meat inspector will get a better benefit than you two board members you get hurt in the job right now, and also the lottery officials get a better benefit than any of us, any Portland firefighter working today. And that's partly why I'm here and why I've been here for the last 10 plus years fighting for this. It's just called equity. So, but the information's in there for you to read. Also, I have in your handout, I have, there was an Fpdr policy was challenged by the Miller case, and I know Jason's aware of it, but the other board members may not be aware of it, but that's a consequence of what happens when things aren't followed by the law. And so I have that information for you as an FYI for you only, for your board only. And then I also have in there, information about PERS had a similar situation, and in 2007, 2006, the Attorney General got involved with the case and settled out of court. PERS had a disability retirement that was not in compliance with state and federal laws, and so it was an attorney named Mr. Paul Connolly out of Salem filed a lawsuit. It was called the Hauser case. I have that information in there for you, the Hauser case. You can reference it. But that case was settled out of court, and it changed PERS. PERS changed their system, corrected the wrongs, and moved forward correctly. And that's my goal for Portland, and I'll stop when that happens. Because that's all I'm asking for, is what the law says I'm entitled to have by suffering a line of duty creating injury. You know, I miss my job. I miss my career. I love being a Portland firefighter more than life, as much as my family. And I was very dedicated to this bureau. So, and the last thing I have in there is Portland City Council is required to comply with state and federal laws related to disability and injury and so forth, and the solution is there. I gave you the solution in there. The last page has a solution to solve this. It can be solved without going to the voter. It can be solved right by City Council in just a stroke of a pen with some negotiations. And I believe that the members that may have been harmed in the past will be cooperative to at least go from this day forward, correct it. And for the next person who gets hurt, they don't have to go through what I've gone through for the last 10 years. All right, let me read my speech now. I introduced myself already. I want to thank the union officials that are here and the other city officials that are here, and retired police officers and firefighters, and any honored guests. I want to thank you for the opportunity and the honor to speak to the board by bringing my message forward. The main intent of my presentation, is about disability, about my situation that I've gone through for the last 10 plus years. As I said, my name is Joe Jimkowski. I suffered a career-ending line of duty injury and lost one of the most precious gifts of life, which was to be a sworn member of my beloved Portland Fire Bureau. All my dreams, ambitions, and career goals of being chief someday of my beloved bureau ended when I was deemed permanently disabled by my beloved Portland Fire Bureau and Rescue, by the Bureau of Human Resources, by Fpdr, previous administration, by the state of Oregon, DPSST, and by the U.S. Social Security Administration, all deemed me permanently disabled. That status, which I'll explain more about that. The main purpose of my presentation today is to bring forth the truth about Fpdr's previous equal to or better, or ETOB is a common term here, than Oregon PERS, for the benefits that may impact my brother and sister Portland firefighters, and equally as important, our protectors in blue, the men and women of the Portland Police Bureau, who have served me numerous times on occasions when I called for a code red or code yellow, which was a firefighter needing help, and they responded immediately. In the same breath, please let me state for the record that the more people that are aware of an injustice, the less chance an injustice will survive. I'm not sure why my career ended this way, which was not my choice. As I said, I love being a Portland firefighter. My life offers you when life offers you a personal challenge, you always have a choice. You can walk away, or you can give purpose to your path. I chose to give purpose to my path, and will now share some of the facts that we uncovered after 5 years of research, searching public records, all of which was completed before I uttered a word about the injustice of Portland police officers and firefighters who suffered a career-ending line of duty injury. Please let me focus on Fpdr history and take a moment to review the undisputed facts as public records speak for themselves. Let us digress back to 1971 and look at Oregon House Bill 1849, which stated all police officers and firefighters in Oregon will be members of Oregon PERS by 1973. One important point there will be discussed again near the end of this presentation. House Bill 1849 was passed by the legislators for all of Oregon police officers and firefighters, and only police officers and firefighters at that time. There is one caveat in House Bill for 1849. It allowed police and fire agencies not in PERS to make their benefits equal to or better than Oregon PERS at the time. In 1971, there were about 44 police and fire agencies in Oregon, which included Fpdr 1, and by 1973, the PERS board deemed that all 44 agencies to be equal to or better than Oregon PERS. The next test came in 1979, when a major change came to PERS, which was the criterion for ETOB tests at that time, and all non-PERS agencies passed the PERS test again. They're equal to or better. In 1981, PERS had another major change, and Fpdr Tier 1 was tested again and passed the ETBO test, which we have all the test results, by the way. I don't have them today with me, but I do have all the test results from public records, which are hard to find nowadays, but I do have them. And then what next is a very important point to mention here, that my brother and sister firefighters, and our protectors in blue, the men and women of the Portland Police Bureau, all of which were Tier 1, have not been evaluated or tested in over 37 years, either by Mercer, Milliman, by the city, by Fpdr, to be ETOB at Oregon PERS. So 1981 was the last time they tested our Tier 1 people for ETOB. And that's just not right. In 1989, the Portland voters passed Fpdr Tier 2, which was better than Tier 1 retirement, not as good for Tier 1 line of duty disability retirements, thereby saving Portland taxpayers, who are my true employers, as I work for the public. And apparently, this was supposed to save about $25 million by 2040. In 1989, Tier 2 was designed by Robert McCrory, an actuary, to be equal to or better than Oregon PERS via a Portland committee under the guidance of Mayor Clark. Another important point to mention is that Mayor Clark did say back then he wanted all Portland police officers and firefighters to go into PERS, but somehow this very important point was overruled. January 1990, Mr. McCrory was back again, and under a different company's name, he did an ETOB against Oregon PERS and deemed Fpdr Tier 2 to be equal to or better than Oregon PERS. At the December 3rd, 1990 PERS board meeting, there were 40 police and fire agencies who were not in PERS. Mark Johnson, a Milliman actuary, shared the ETBO test results with the board, and all 40 agencies failed the two test components of the ETBO process with PERS, which included Portland, despite being evaluated by Mr. McCrory. The next point is very important because the PERS board gave the city of Portland a third option, which is on the record, which was not part of ORS, OAR, or any Oregon legislation. The PERS board gave the city of Portland a pass for ETOB via an ad hoc election. And ad hoc election for pass on ETOB, which was not part of the law, but only if they promised to give all future benefits of PERS. It was a promise in 1990, as per the records. The city of Portland, Fpdr Tier 2, which passed by the voters in '89, passed by Mr. McCrory in January 1990, and implemented in January 1st, 1990, failed the PERS ETBO test in December. So the promise to give all future benefits to their police officers and firefighters was an easy solution at the time. In 2003, the Oregon legislature passed a bill that all non-PERS agencies be tested every 2 years now. Before, it was just as major changes. So they passed that bill every 2 years. In 2005, also in 2003, PERS passed their new plan Tier 3. In 2005, Milliman tested Fpdr Tier 3 and stated that Fpdr passed the preliminary test, which was the first part of the test. The second part is a full test if you fail the preliminary test, which was the first test for equity, and so they passed it. In 2005, the preliminary test the preliminary test excluded FPDR Tier 1 and FPDR Tier 2 for ETOB with Oregon PERS, which is a violation of Oregon law for ETOB for Portland police officers and firefighters. Please note, FPDR and the City of Portland were not in compliance with the 2003 ETOB testing every 2 years for all tiers that started in 2004. The Oregon PERS Board shares that responsibility. You may not be that today, but being in violation of ETOB laws back then. In 2007, the Oregon legislature passed House Bill 2280, which again defined 3 Oregon PERS tiers under the law, with Tier 1 for all employees hired before January 1st, 1996. PERS Tier 2 was from January 1st, 96 to August 28th, 2003, and PERS Tier 3 was for all new employees hired after August 29th, 2003. The most important point to remember here, since 1971 and House Bill 1849, all subsequent changes to Oregon PERS always, and again, I say always, included active and retired police officers and firefighters for ETOB testing. In November 2009, Mercer actuary stated a very important point for the first time, as to the best of my knowledge, concerning PERS ETOB testing. The actuary stated on the record, there's a conflict of interest, in his opinion, for him to evaluate Portland's FPDR with Oregon PERS instead of PERS board meeting. Next, he says, the actuary says, the actuary stated the FPDR 2005 ETBO test was not a preliminary test as per the standards, but instead was a cursory review. Once again, it's a violation being noted on the record. As per House Bill 2280, in 2010, Mercer tested FPDR for ETOB, which is on the website for Portland, with Oregon PERS, and once again deemed that FPDR passed the PERS ETOB test. One very important point to note, Mercer actuary stated that he omitted FPDR Tier 1 from the 2000 PERS ETOB test. Remember, the law stated, since 1971, ETBO tests shall include active and retired police officers and firefighters. Since 2003, all PERS ETBO tests would be every 2 years, but House Bill 2280 changed the PERS ETBO testing to every 12 years, which doesn't make sense to me, as PERS makes major changes every 2 years. The next scheduled PERS ETOB for FPDR is in 2022, but this must be and will be changed. Last point to mention is, for the moment, on September 22nd, 2015, the FPDR board voted to remove all references of the disability retirement when it was brought to their attention from the FPDR charter, which violates Portland City Charter as well as state and federal disability laws for police officers and firefighters. One point I want to make kudos to Jason. He voted nay on that day to not take that out of the charter and says, what do you call it when a police officer or firefighter gets injured in the line of duty? What do you call it? What do you call me? You know, right now, I'm a healthy, happy firefighter who worked 30-year career and left the Portland Fire Bureau, which is not true. I wish it was true. Believe me, I wish it was true. But as I said, I'm giving purpose to my point. At this point in my presentation, please let me address and demonstrate for the board members and our audience and the public what a typical day, week, or month is for me for the rest of my life. But remember, I'm not disabled under FPDR right now. I'll just take a second here. Roll that up. And I'll give you a hand up to roll this when I'm done. I want to draw your attention to some of the things I have here. And sometimes a visual works better than just discussing. I take medications. For me right now, I have an autoimmune response to hepatitis C. I am waiving my HIPAA privacy rights at this point and going public once again with all this information on the record for the whole world to see. Because I know it's going to be on the internet, it's going to be on YouTube. And I don't have a problem with that, because to me, it's the benefits for the Portland police officers that came before me, with me, and after me are more important than my privacy. But anyway, I have an autoimmune response to hepatitis C. As per OHSU, it's very rare. It happens to some unfortunate people. It happened to me. Once again, why? I don't know. Maybe this is why, because I don't quit. I'll fight to get what's right for Portland police officers and firefighters. Even though I'm not working here today, I will still fight for them until the law is changed, or till we comply with the law. I should say, law is there, we don't need to comply with it. Anyway, my digestive tract stopped working. So I have choice, or I put a bag on my side, or go through a colonoscopy preparation procedure 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Most people dread doing that once or twice in their life. I do it every day, every night, and every morning. I drink this stuff, to take these pills in order to avoid that bag. This is for my month, I say, and that's just the rest of my life. I've been doing this for the last 10 years. The next point to mention is that, I forgot it. There's a couple more for that month, because I do go through quite a bit for the month. The next point I want to mention is that the autoimmune response to hepatitis C has caused neuropathy. Like a diabetic has neuropathy in their feet. I had that in my fingertips and toes. I worked for years with the hepatitis until the autoimmune response started in '99. I worked that year, had trouble. It was in my fingertips and toes. Like a diabetic, my neuropathy progressed full body. So I get stabbing pains every second in my extremities, in my back, my torso, front, back, my groin, my eye. It's actually progressed my eyes right now, and my vision is starting to be blurry. And I don't know where it's going to stop, but the solution is taking a large amount of opioids to get through for the month. And with that, I was on, for the longest time, fentanyl, but thanks to the CDC and their changes, they took me off fentanyl, which actually helped me very much. It helped me tremendously. But now I'm on short-acting opioids, same amount, except I wake up every night because I'm in pain. So that's what I go through. One of the things, too, that taking all these opioids, it depletes your testosterone. And so my testosterone was 0 on the scale, which also throws off your entire body, so we have to replace that to get through the day. The next thing we have here is, we have some modafinil. Well, let me finish with the pain stuff here. We have Lyrica for pain as well, and we have, what's the next thing? We have one other one here, Cymbalta for pain. It's a cocktail for pain, and altogether, this gets my pain down to a level where I can have some quality of life. Next, I have to take a thing called Flomax, because the opioids also stop your bladder. So you take something to get your bladder working. And despite all that, I have to take an amphetamine to get me through the day. And as Nelson Hall knows, he actually noticed I'm a little less than I was before, because we cut the dose in half, because we cut the opioids down. But I still need the amphetamine to get through the day. And just about done here. Like a diabetic, there's sores on your feet, so we have to have, premiums for those kind of things. Like I say, but mine's full body pain. And the last thing is, in case I OD, my wife or my family members have a Narcan to give me, just in case I OD on something. But I haven't OD'd. I'm opioid tolerant. So anyway, that's the last thing I have to share. I'll put this away. I have your hands out for you. But I think it's better to see you while I go through, rather than just say, I take medications. And this is what I do for the rest of my life. But remember, I was deemed disabled by City of Portland, 3 agencies. It's on the record. I was deemed by the state of Oregon. I was on Medicare since I've been 52, 53. Excuse me, which doesn't happen unless you have a valid claim. And autonomic neuropathy and sensory neuropathy are automatic. And then when my employment first ended in 2012 on a medical layoff, I was deemed permanently disabled. My disability was frozen for life. I won that in court thanks to the help of the union. We won that in court. Otherwise, every Portland firefighter would have disability frozen for life. We won that in court. And I thought they left me alone. I lost my sick leave payoff. They said, you don't get it per you're on disability. I accepted that, walked away. Except several years later, I get a letter, we're going to retire you now. Well, if I don't work here and it says, you don't work, I'm not an employee, you can't retire me. Well, I got a letter 2 days later after I exposed the truth about Fpdr. It said, if you don't sign these papers next month, you're going to have nothing. You'll jeopardize what you have now and post. I didn't sign the papers. Because I wasn't being arrogant. I thought I didn't work here anymore. In fact, you can't retire me if I don't work here. What happened was I had nothing. I lost all my medications. I lost all my life-saving support. I had nothing, no compensation. And it was only 3 days. But the intent was there and showed that sign these papers. I was told by Ms. Hartline, sign or you get nothing. And I brought witnesses to that meeting. And so, this is the kind of treatment that goes on, and I want the board to be aware of it. Because ultimately, you're responsible. Under the law, it all comes back to you. You board members are responsible. And I want you to know about that responsibility, which is in the laws I have here for you. And that's why I'm here today, to let you know there's a problem here. It can be fixed. And you know what I asked for? I asked for 15 minutes from the city. Give me 15 minutes, and let's talk about this in private. And there's a solution here. There's a solution that's workable for everybody, and we could all walk away and move on with the business. And the next cop or firefighter gets hurt, or shot or anything else, they won't have to go through what I went through the last 10 plus years. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Give me a minute, please. I'll be out of your way.
Do you have copies of? Oh, okay.
Are we open to questions?
Yes. You have any questions? I'll answer questions. If you have questions,
Yeah, I'd like
Sure.
to ask you some questions.
Sure.
So, thanks. I appreciate you coming
You're welcome.
forward, talking to us and things like that. You're very, you've got a lot of things going on and things like that. I wanted to catch everything that you were talking about and the message that you were trying to convey. I wrote down some notes and things like that about different points you were making. I guess what I'm looking for, and I know you're going to give us the handouts, what's the main overall goal you're asking us to review?
I'm asking the board to look at Fpdr disability retirement, which is not there, and I can show you right here, and it's in your packet. I've got some copies right here. There's which was given up, there's 184 cops and firefighters came before me since 1948. It's a list that I have, okay? I have that list, 184 cops and firefighters that retired on disability, that their last day of employment was on disability. They were deemed disabled, okay? My suggestion was, what PERS did is PERS reevaluated everybody. They went back and looked at everybody again. Okay, let's see, are they still alive? Are they disabled or not disabled? Let's look at that. That cut their numbers way down. That cut their reevaluation back of what they were responsible for. That person either was healed, was better, and is not disabled anymore. So that number that PERS had, which I don't know what it was 105 in the lawsuit, and it may be more than then, but that was in a class action lawsuit. And what they did is they reevaluated everybody, look at it, talk to their physicians. Well, if you have no physician and you have no medical, then you're not disabled probably, okay? You left on an injury at that point, but you're probably fine now. Whatever it is, you healed, it changed. That's fine. That's a plus for the city. So, but PERS did reevaluate everybody and then change their status accordingly to state law. This is what Portland gave out for years. That's in your packet. It says type of pension, service, disability. So it was there. It was there on paper for years. On April 28, 2015, I came to the board meeting and I said, there is no Fpdr disability retirement. I said, it's fake. It's a fraud. It never existed. It's a fugazi, you can say, whatever you want to call it, okay? It doesn't exist anymore. And so on that day there, Mr. Hutchinson, who is correct, he said, I follow the charter. And he's correct, he followed the charter. But the problem is the charter is not following the law. That's the problem. It doesn't follow the law.
So then, that brings me to my kind of a couple quick questions here. You mentioned that in 2003, there was a law that was passed for every 2 years to be reevaluated.
Correct.
Is one of your assumptions that we have not reevaluated
Well, they tested in
correctly?
2005, Tier 3 only, okay?
Right.
Yet it said you passed, but it was used by PERS. And PERS board shares responsibility in this too because they're passing you, okay? It's like a little kid taking candy somewhere, and if you get away with it, well, you're going to do it again and again. But the PERS board has the ultimate responsibility here. And I've been to them already, and it got to the point where they refused to allow me to speak at the board meeting on public comments, which the law says you can do that, and they said, you can't speak here today. They wouldn't let me speak. That's fine. I'll be on the agenda next month. So,
And I'm not trying to cut you off. I guess I'm trying to get pinpointed here on
Sure.
on an answer from you.
yeah, they're supposed to every 2 years.
Hold on, let me ask the question again, make sure, because I'm trying to get what we can do, what you're asking, and I'm trying to be clear on that.
Okay, sure.
My first question is one of your requests for FPDNR because you also mentioned that in 2007, there was an outside council that felt that they were inappropriate to evaluate the PERS law, or to be reevaluated, that you said that they had to excuse themselves or whatnot. My question is, one of the questions you're asking or request for us is to be reevaluated to see if we're equal to or better than PERS?
Yes, all three tiers though, active and retired, all
You're
three
asking
tiers.
all three tiers?
Yes, the tier 1 wasn't tested, it has not been tested since 1981. That's over 37 years ago. Those poor members, they're dying off right now. And they're being penalized. They're supposed to be equal to or better, and it's a much lower benefit of a plan that they have for ETOB. Back then it was, but now the 2010 test, which is one on the record now, that does say that you passed. But he does say the same gentleman that said that it was a conflict of interest. He did the ETOB. He did the ETOB. I don't want to say his name today on the record, but it's in the record. He did do the ETOB for Portland, even though he says it on the record. He wanted to get it out, I guess, clear his conscience. I don't know why, but he said that, and then he went ahead and did the ETOB anyway of FPDR, and that is the 2010 test, okay? And he says Portland passed. Yet in the minutes, there's no record of anywhere, and then at the end it shows up that FPDR passed. He says, this is the last thing I want to say. I went to the PERS board. I hired an attorney. I went to court. I lost in court because the evidence the city submitted says we passed the state test. So what are you talking about, Mr. Chimkowski? And obviously, when Mr. Hearing says, well, they passed it. I can't overrule PERS board. They passed it. Even though I said there's nothing there, so I lost. But I went to the PERS board. PERS board sent me a letter after my attorney's letter and said, guess what? Mr. Jimkowski is getting A, B, C, D, E, and F. He's getting a 75% pension, non-taxable on a state and federal law, corporate disability. He's getting this benefit for his family, his children, this. I'm getting none of that. So I went back to the PERS board of my own and say, not one thing you said here, PERS board, is true. But I want to tell the board that, and I went to that meeting, and they said, any public comment? I stood up, and they banged the gavel down and said, meeting over. I said, but you said public comment. They said, meeting over. Get on the agenda next time. Fine, I learned my lesson. I'll be on the agenda next time.
Right, so I want to clarify that. So one of the requests that you're asking us to do is to evaluate all 3 tiers.
Do a preliminary test as per the law for all 3 tiers, that especially Tier 1's been omitted so long, and the actuary even admitted it in the ETOB 2010 that he skipped Tier 1, but the law since 1971 had said active and retired. All the way through, no matter what changed about testing or times, active and retired have always been included in that process.
Then I'm going to ask you the next question. You don't have to answer it if you want to. It might be a violation of HIPAA, so I'm not going to ask you if you choose not to.
You seem like I hit what I did, so I mean,
Right, I just want to ask this. So one of the statements you made was the fact that everybody in the state, PERS, everybody else has classified you as disabled, and Fpdr has classified you as non-disabled. Is that, did I hear you?
correct. My status right now, I retired under a service pension the second time. And ironically, I was hired a third time, which I found out in 2016. Without my knowledge, I was hired, and I got a letter from the city that said, disregard that. I'm the wrong person to say that to. They hired me to correct the federal violation. They had a problem with the sick leave payoff, which finally came, but I never got an accounting of it. I still to this date can't get an accounting of it, because if I get an accounting of it, it shows that you hired me in 2016, and you can't hire me without telling me. But they did that to correct their problem. Like I say, I don't want to do this. I want to be left alone. But I want what the law says I'm entitled to have, and what you're entitled to have, and what you're entitled to have.
So my last request, it's not really a question, is if you haven't already attached it, you've given us a lot of information to think about. Maybe if there's one last bullet point type of highlight that you would like me and the other trustees to evaluate from that information. So it's like a very,
Sure.
very
could say-
detailed on what you're looking for us to evaluate. So that way we can weigh that upon
Sure.
the information that you
Sure.
provide us.
Fair enough.
And if you could make that like on a, and I hate to make you do more work.
No, I don't.
On a separate sheet of paper, so that way I can independently look at your concerns, small, independent concerns, review the material that you provide, and then, we'll move on from there.
I will send that to you after this meeting. I will send that to you. Each one of you, I have your email addresses, all your email addresses. I will send that to you, and it is to do a true ETOB test that PERS did for PDR Tier 1, 2, and 3. Right now, there's no disability retirement. It's gone on the record. And I say Jason Boyer that because he voted nay, and I know kudos to Jason for standing up for that, and I respect him for that. So. And unfortunately, the police officer here, but I will send that to you. Do a full ETOB of the compliance with the law of the House Bill 2280, which is the last legislation. It's called House Bill 2280. It's in your packet, and it explains in there what the test is supposed to be like, and for all 3 tiers. And I'll send that to you.
I
It's in
have
your
just
packet,
one
too.
follow-up question to Brian's, and that is it your position or understanding that those equal to or better than tests need to be done independently for each of the 3 tiers? Or that it's
one
done
test.
in composite?
It's a composite test they do. They look
So,
at, and
so
then
if
they break it down. They look at each tier compared to PERS Tier 1, 2, 3.
Let her clarify her
Yeah,
question.
what I want
I'd
to
like
clarify
hear this
is,
question.
could the test be passed in composite if Tier 3 benefits were better than Tier 1 or Tier 2? Could the plan as a whole pass, or must each of the 3 tiers pass separately?
According to the 2010 Mercer report presented to PERS, there was 10 agencies left by 2010 out of those 40-something in the beginning. What they did is they put on a chart, they put PERS Tier 1, and they compared all the 10 cities on there. Well, 8 cities. They excluded the city of Portland, and they excluded Morrow County. And then they said, but they compared Tier 1 with Tier 1 people from 96 on back, whatever your hire date was, what those benefits were. They went from 96 to 2003, on the next part of the chart. And I could send that to you. And then the third part was for Tier 3 from August of 29th, 2003 forward. That whoever was hired after that date, what plan they have, which Fpdr would be Tier 3, what their plan is compared to the 4 aspects of the test were, it was a service pension with post-medical. PERS people get a $65 stipend at Medicare.
Could I interrupt you for just a moment? And I'm not trying to be rude.
No.
You've got a lot of information inside you that you're very well versed on, right? And I'm not.
Okay.
So.
It's in your packet.
I understand that, and I appreciate that. I don't want to venture too far off from what you're, and I don't want to interrupt you for your points, but I liked her question, and I'd like you to listen to the question one more time so that we get an answer to that specific question. And if you can, and again, like I said, you've got a lot of information inside you that I don't know. I'm not as versed at it. If you could answer that question, maybe ask it again and get
Sure.
the question answered as clear as we can.
I'm looking for your insight about it, but obviously we would need to get other legal opinion on this as well.
Right. Right.
But specifically looking for your perspective on whether compliance with that testing requirement must be satisfied separately for each of the 3 tiers.
Correct. Correct, that is correct. In the 2010 PERS presentation, which is about 20, 30 pages, I'll send it to you, the actuary, I don't want to say his name on the record here, but the actuary went ahead and looked at from 96 on back, and all these different agencies, what they had, whatever their plan were. He went from 96 to 2003, whatever they were. For ours, it'd be Fpdr2 would be, members be in there, and for Tier 3, 2003, which is some Fpdr2 members, because we hired 2007. So there'd be a combination, a blended, I guess, combination in there. But that's for the actuary to do. I'm not an actuary, I'm not an attorney. But they did look at all 3 tiers separately. And what the House Bill 2280 says is, you look at all 3 tiers separately, okay, for the benefits, and you look at 4 components of the test. It's a service pension with post-medical benefits and then it's a disability retirement with post-medical benefits. Those are the 4 aspects of the law. And that's what they test for, those three sections
For each tier.
for each tier.
Thank you.
The criteria set by the state legislature from the 3 different timelines from 96 on backs, 96, 2003, 2003 forward.
Okay, thank
So
you.
Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes,
okay.
thank you.
I'll reiterate that you do know a lot, and we appreciate all of the detail that you've just shared with us.
I have it in the packet too as
And
well
if
for
you
you.
would direct the package and any further information that you would like the board to review and the staff to review to Kathy, so that she can be the funnel point for us
I'll do
to
that.
all
I'll do
get
that.
the same information.
I'll do that. I'll send that 2010 PERS presentation, which you'll see, we were talking about the 3 tiers in there. They discussed that in detail in there and explains the 3 different tiers in there with those 4 with the criteria, those 4 things in there. Look at each criterion separately.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe.
Thank you for your time. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Please
I
include
do
your,
appreciate this.
please include your contact information with Kathy as
Oh,
well.
yeah, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Oh, we have an individual who signed up to comment on this item. We do?
My name is Dell Stevens, and I'm a retired firefighter, and I'm here to make some follow-up comments on to Joe's presentation. To begin with, I do have to acknowledge I am the president of the retired firefighters. However, I'm not speaking officially for that group. I'm going to voice my own opinions. A lot of material was covered, and I'm actually pleasantly surprised that the board tried to follow, because a lot of it requires about 30 years of history. And I don't think anybody on the board was present during those times. I'd like to tell you that I was part of the process of reforming our pension back in 1990. I spent 2 years going to meetings and working with the actuary, Robert McCrory, in revamping our pension system, because I knew it was not equal to the PERS system, okay? I knew at the time that the city's thrust was to improve our plan and give us some upgraded benefits, but not to put us into PERS. And actually, it was a mayor's task force that was established, and the goal was to improve our pension or go into PERS. They didn't want to go into PERS. I had to go and meet with PERS on my own to have a chance even to find out what the other side was open. And I met with the PERS director for an hour. All of you people, I believe, are under PERS. And so you understand it is a very modern, well-funded system, even though there's some problems with the current liability on the Tier 1 people. But it actually is a system that earns money because of its investments. Our system takes money away. It doesn't earn money. It produces nothing. And at the time, I knew that it was wrong. I had a comparison chart of our plan to Portland. And I went to every city commissioner and the mayor, and I got them very aroused about it. And actually, as Joe alluded to, the mayor, Bud Clark, his proposal was to put all of us into PERS. He said it was the right thing to do, it was the modern thing to do, and it was the financially wise thing to do. But the financial people at City Hall did not want to spend the money to buy our pass time to put us into PERS. And so they went the other way, and they constantly tried to steer us away from PERS, okay? We ended up with a system that I did not feel was equal to PERS. In fact, we had to vote on it after 2 years of study, and I made a statement at that time, this was in 1989, I believe, that I don't believe that we have achieved what we were charged with doing. It's like getting a bite of the apple, but it's not the full apple. And I said, we don't get Social Security. And I understand that the board is wondering why we don't have that. It's because the city has to pay 6% of the employee's salary into Social Security. And I said the board, I meant the city has to pay that, okay? They didn't want to give us Social Security. We wanted that. The people that retire that don't have Social Security, they're not eligible for Medicare. We've got people out there that are paying $1,500 a month for private insurance because they're not qualified for Medicare, okay? And anyway, I went and met with the director of PERS, and he was willing to come and meet with the board and to describe their plan and what they could do for us. And I went back and reported that to the mayor's task force, and the mayor's task force jumped on me like I was a predator, and I didn't belong in their committee, and told me to call him back and cancel the invitation. They didn't want to hear what he even had to say, all right? So when Mr. Jimkowski talks about a history of unequal benefits, I'm there to testify. I was part of that. I witnessed it, okay? What we've ended up with today are two systems, one of which is a modern system with truly exemplary benefits that other pension systems in the nation have followed and emulated. And our old plan, which is very costly and has unequal benefits, does not provide Social Security, and our members are suffering for it. I go to funerals all the time of people that their last years of their life were struggling because they did not get the benefits they deserved. And I'll tell you just another quick example of that. Our pension system does not allow for a disability retirement now. Your present director, Mr. Hutchinson, took that away about 2 years ago, and even then, at 30 years, if you were disabled and went off on disability, at 30 years, they retired you. You no longer got the disability benefit, which in fact is a disability benefit that is non-taxable for the member. Now, the police officers that are shot, like Stan Harmon, that spend about 25 years in a wheelchair because of a paralysis, do you think that maybe having 30% or a third of their salary protected by a tax law that would allow them to keep all of their pension would be helpful? Mr. Jimkowski, he's paying a third of his pension. I mean, we're grateful to have our pension, and nobody would ever take that away from the city. But they have other problems, and they should have the same benefit. A man under PERS that is on disability, he gets that pension non-taxable for life. And I raised an issue 4 years ago about that, and Nancy Hartline, who is the number 2 person here, wrote a letter about it. And she basically said that yeah, we could do that. And yes, like you pointed out, it's true that the state of New York has that, and it's non-taxable for life, and we could do that too. And there'd be no cost to the city because it's actually just federal taxes we're talking about. But she said it might cause more people to go off on disability. And so she was against that. And so they discouraged it. And when I see people that are suffering and struggling, I want to help them. And I'm looking for ways to do it. And Brian, you asked some very pointed questions about the history of our pension plan and why we're at where we are now and the equal to or better than tests. I can tell you that the equal to or better than tests have been rigged. They're not a fair test. You know who pays for the test? You guys know? The employer of the fund that hires them to do the test. They pay for the test. Can anybody look me in the eye and tell me that passes the smell test? It does not. And I can tell you that Portland even failed in 1990 after we passed our pension, our new reform pension. And you know what they did? Instead of raising our benefits to make them equal to the PERS benefits, they created an exemption to the law. And I'll tell you, an ORS statute does not allow for creation of modifications later on. It is a law that has to be followed, and there was only 2 provisions in that law if an agency, a public agency, failed, and that was to upgrade the benefits to make them equal to PERS, or they had 60 days to put the members into the PERS system and to develop a financial contract to do so. Portland went the other way. Portland sent people down there, and they lobbied behind the scenes. I've got a record of the PERS board meeting where the exemption was proposed, and it was accepted by a Portland firefighter who was under PERS, and he made a motion that would be a sufficient reason for Portland to no longer be subject to the law. They basically said that Portland was equal to it because of the exemption. And ever since then, when they've done their tests, they've said that Portland has passed. But in 1990, they failed. So if a test failed in 1990, how can you tell me that 27 years later it's still equal? It's not equal. And I've got lots of examples, and so does Joe. Joe is very thorough. He spends a lot of time on the computer doing research. And I appreciate the fact that you guys gave him some consideration about the fact that he spoke pretty fast and maybe was a little disjointed in some of the things. But he's a resource and a world of knowledge. And he's an example of so many police officers and firefighters who are disabled and are not getting the benefits they deserve. I would like to see a task force that the board could create to look at our system internally and compare it to the PERS system. I'd like to see that. And it's within your power to do that. If Mr. Hutchinson doesn't want to go along with it, you need to exercise your own independent powers. At one time, and I sat on the pension board for 4 years, at one time it was a very strong and well-based system with people of integrity that did not let things pass. Well, now it's been reduced, it's been modified, it's a different system. You don't vote on disability cases anymore. It's decided by one person. I can tell you that one person should not decide everything. That's too much power. And the board should have that power. That's the way it used to be, and when I was part of it. And, excuse me, there's a lot of things that bear looking into, and this was kind of a quiet day for business on your part. I know you didn't have a lot scheduled, and maybe this was an opening that will get some people concerned. And now that you're on the board, you have an opportunity to do the right thing, and you can help some of these people, and I hope that you will do that, and maybe call upon some of the resources that are still available. I remember those meetings like they were yesterday, and I can tell you a lot of the things that happened, and I know a lot of the things were done underhanded, and I know the city is interested primarily in saving money, and that's what it was about, okay? If there's anything else that I could do as a person, we don't really want to sue the city, we really don't, but it's going to get to the point that the inequity is going to be so apparent, we cannot sit back and let it go on.
Thank you for all of your comments. I hope that your contact information you can make available to Kathy so that as we have questions from the material that Mr. Jimkowski is going to share with us, we can call on you as well.
It would be my pleasure.
I would like to say that I believe the people on this board have integrity and believe in our job, which is to support the plan. It's disturbing to me to think that somebody would be up here without that outlook. So there were reforms that were done in the 90s. We are a different board, it is a different plan, but we sit here with integrity and understand what our responsibilities are.
Thank you, Jennifer. I appreciate those comments.
Sure, thank you.
Okay.
You made one request during the last couple minutes there. You wanted us to formulate it, and I didn't get the notes written down fast enough. Whatever an independent review or something you mentioned in your.
He mentioned a task force, and I would recommend that we take a look first at all of the material.
Yes. And when you give that to her, please include that request as well, so that way it's fresh in our memories. We understand what your desire is, because these meetings are great and everything like that, but sometimes the desires that are expressed aren't always remembered. So if you could give that to Kathy, that'd be great, so we could
Well,
look at that
and
desire.
it should be open to a lot of other opinions. I'm certainly only one, but the City Club has done studies on our pension system. That's available. And you know what the recommendation has always been? It makes no sense to have two separate systems. Why are the firemen and policemen in a separate system? They should be part of PERS. That's what the City Club has said every time. The city auditor is very concerned about the way the pension system operates and their millage levy, okay? It's the only part of the city that has its own millage is our pension system.
And I would add to that we have a unique plan in the country, and that when Moody's looks at the city and rates the city from a credit rating standpoint, we have spent years explaining to them the way our plan works, because it is a unique plan in the entire country. We remain a AAA city. It is a pay-go system based on the millage rate and the property taxes that come in to fund it, whereas PERS is a pay-forward basis. So they are two diametrically opposed plans. We actually do have a full agenda today. Right behind you are the folks from our external auditor, our financial auditor, our independent auditor, who are going to give us comments about the financial wherewithal of the plan. So I would recommend that you stick around for that part of the agenda.
Well, I'm aware of a lot of those things because I was there during that time, and I could share more things that would be quite disturbing to say publicly. I know that people don't want to end up with a bad opinion about their city. But I know things, okay?
Just one clarification. You
Jason.
said something, and Joe had said something too. I just want a clarification. When you said, he was talking about when I made a vote in 2015, and you made a statement that the director removed our disability and retirement. Are you talking we removed the term in the rules, or we actually removed a disability retirement that was a benefit? What do you,
Well, they removed the terminology from the charter.
Yeah, okay, so you're not saying that they removed a benefit when that.
Well, the benefit was really a hollow benefit because they weren't giving us anything for it.
Okay, so
even though the PERS system has a disability that is a non-taxable disability with medical benefits, we don't have that.
And we didn't, they never administered it that way anyway, though, right?
Well, let me tell you this. As part of that exemption that was granted back in 1990, okay, and it was done down at the legislature, and Randy Leonard, by the way, was the person that was the spearhead on trying to keep Portland separate, okay? They did, in fact, make a provision that Portland would be allowed to stay separate based on that exemption if they gave all future benefits and improvements that PERS gave to their members. Well, lo and behold, in 2006, PERS was sued by a police officer who was disabled because at 30 years they took away his disability, his non-taxable disability. And so it went to court. Partway through, the Attorney General made a determination that they likely would lose, and so they settled. They paid everybody's taxes back from when they first went off on disability and were at 30 years and were converted to retirement. They got it all back. And PERS did that on their own because they knew it was the right thing to do, and they had the ability to do it. Portland has the ability to do that also. I've got the letter from Nancy Hartline with me today if you want to read it. They can do that today. They could make it a motion and pass it. But they haven't done so. And we've got people that really need the benefit. Maybe the board can help on that, I hope.
So, thank you.
All right,
And we'll
thank
take
you.
all of the information that you want to share with us.
Put a copy of that letter with Kathy as well?
Yep.
All right, thank you,
Please,
Brian.
thank you.
Nancy Hartline letter?
Yes, the one you just spoke of.
You can send that because we have that on our record.
Good.
Great. Okay.
I'd like the one that Dell has, though, just to make sure. I know, I'm not saying improprieties or anything like that, but if he's referring to a specific one, I wasn't here when Natalie, I don't know who she is. I want to make sure that they're the exact same letter.
She preceded Stacy.
Oh, very good.
Stacy's predecessor.
Oh, then,
Yeah.
very good.
Okay, I have two quick comments and one quick question on this, and we'll move through it really fast. The one comment is, thanks for the clarification, Jason. The disability retirement, FPDR2 created in 1990 has never had a disability retirement component. What happens if somebody's on disability, they hit retirement age, they're then converted to a full regular service retirement. And that is what happened with Mr. Jimkowski. With that, everybody in that same situation, they go through disability, hit retirement age, they're converted to a service retirement. There's no determination that they are no longer disabled, they're just no longer entitled to disability benefits.
They're no longer entitled because of the way our charter's written, correct?
The way the charter is
If they
written.
were
The charter
possibly in
could-
a different system,
They were receiving disability benefits, on a certain date, they get converted to receiving service retirement benefits.
by the letter of our charter.
Correct.
Okay.
And Jason is correct, we used to use a term meaning disability retirement, applying, that was a term we applied to people who went through disability all the way up to retirement and then retired. We removed it from the rules because of the confusion that some people thought it was creating a benefit. It was an internal terminology that we used, and we've stopped using that in here because of the confusion that it was creating. But there was no benefit to be taken away, and nothing was taken away in 1985.
So if I'm to be clear on that, because that is that way, right? This is the new guy asking a new question. What you're saying is they go from a disability factor, they're then retired, right?
Correct.
So any benefits that they would be given through disability for any type of medical issues that they might have is
They
gone.
have post-retirement medical will continue while they're on retirement.
Right, but under
They-
that system, so if they were receiving medical benefits and then they are formally retired
Right.
and then now they're under a retired thing,
Yeah.
all of their medical benefits that they were receiving under the disability portion are gone.
No.
No, not all.
We have post-retirement medical.
Right.
They are
So
entitled to
some
receiving.
could be gone.
If
Or
it's
is
a
it,
medical.
is it the
Ask the
same?
question differently.
Okay, let me.
What is the difference?
Yeah.
There is, if they have an approved disability claim and had it approved and are receiving medical treatment tied back to that prior disability claim, we'll continue to pay medical. I will use Mr. Jimkowski as a prime example. We are paying his medical because his medical condition today is related to a disability claim, approved disability claim prior to retirement.
Thank you. That answers my
So
question.
the medical he's talking about today, we are paying for.
Okay, I have two follow-ups on that then. One, does the taxation of the benefit change?
Yes, from
okay.
disability is 75%, maximum 75% tax-free. Under retirement, it's a maximum 84%, but taxable. And so there is possibly a math to where your take-home pay could be less under service retirement than it is under a disability than you're receiving for disability.
And that
I
is
believe that's
IRS.
part of the, what?
And that's IRS driven.
Yes,
Is that right?
IRS and State of Oregon
Okay.
driven.
No, but I just wanted to get out there, there was a difference
So the
in
net
taxability.
benefit that we pay increases when they go to retirement. Depending upon their tax status, it can lower their net after-tax pay could be lower when they retire.
Okay. And then my second question was, since you said there is no, so there's the disabled employee benefit and then ultimately a service retirement benefit.
Correct.
Is the non-existence of a disability retirement provision different than Oregon PERS?
PERS has one, but again, you have to look at the entire PERS plan and what they have and what they don't have. Our disability benefit is 75%, whereas a disability benefit for non-FPDR members is 66, or about 66 2/3%. So we pay our higher disability benefit than a firefighter in another jurisdiction receives when they receive workers' comp. We also, because what we're doing is we've blended our disability and retirement into a single plan. If you tried to blend workers' comp and PERS into a single plan, which they are totally separate, you're going to find that there are some big advantages by combining the two together. We will pay workers, if you cannot be a police officer, you will always receive a disability benefit until you retire. In workers' comp, that's not the case. If you're determined to be able to go back to work in another form, they will settle with you and stop paying. They'll give you a small lump sum, and then they'll stop paying your benefits. So you could go years with no income if you can't get another job. We will continue to pay some form of income. So you've got it, when you mesh the two plans together, there's quite a bit of differences between them and quite a bit of benefits in the way our plan is written. And we can spend a lot of time on this with it, but you have to
You
look at
answered
how
my
we
quick
mesh the
questions.
two together with that. And so some of the police officers and firefighters in other jurisdictions don't have some of the advantages that people get out of our disability plan. So hence that may be one reason why they have a disability. So there's,
Sam, just to be clear, though, going back to the disability retirement terminology that was used pre-1990.
no, it wasn't pre-1990. This was pre-1985. It was an internal term that we used.
So the change in terminology didn't impact the taxability of the benefit.
It made zero change in the benefit because we can't change the charter. We took the terminology out of the rules. It made no change in how the rules are applied, made no change in the benefit. There's zero change except we got rid of the two words that were confusing and conveying a message that should not have been conveyed, that there was this extra benefit.
Okay.
That was the whole reason why I took it out of there, just so we could get away from this discussion that we had today.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
We do have guests who've come here to
Yep.
present on two other items that we've got on the agenda. So I don't mean to cut this off.
I just have a quick question for Sam, and kind of a generalized question on all of this. I know there's a charter and I know there's a plan and things like that, and it's been revamped over the years, so there's obviously room to move and to change things. And we're under a very systematic type of system, but there are so many different combinations and so many different things that can happen to police or fire at any one day or things. So
Yeah.
it's hard to have a universal system when you have independent people working for you or working for the city. Don't you think it might be an idea to explore that in some fashion or another, we don't just make it an overall universal system, but rather a system that works for each individual person? Not saying each individual person deserves their own policy, but when you lump sum it and then you throw in variables, not every variable can be accounted for in a lump sum type of situation.
That's true of any plan you have.
And I
Whether
just think that's
whether
something we
it's
should
PERS, it's
explore.
got the same issue with it too. Every plan you have has it. The thing, if you want to change your plan, you're going to have to go to the voters.
Right, and I'm fine with that. I'm just saying.
I
think
just
there's
want to tell
always
you,
a-
if that's the direction you want to go, it's a huge series of steps to go, and the voters are the ones that have to change it.
And I don't think using the word huge series of steps is correct.
Well,
I think it's a series of steps, but it's something that us as a board should always be reviewing how we're doing business, how we're processing things, because we are. I mean,
Okay.
we do have a responsibility to every single one of those members. And I don't think we should look at obstacles as a huge issue. I think we should look at
It's-
obstacles and situations that come up to us for us to review.
You can't, I just want to tell you, well, let me put the huge process. In order to get, because several of the people here have been involved in prior charter changes, it's a 2 to 3 year process. So just
fine.
want to know if that's the direction you want to go. It is a major, I will say it's a major undertaking.
Right.
There is just one last question, I'll kill it right here. Is there a takeaway instructions for the board or the instructions for FPDR with this at this point?
At this point, the instructions are for the presenters in the room to give the information to Kathy so that you can just, you, Sam, can distribute that information to all of us for review. And as you've done in the past, in the email that you send out to us, you can say, please, let me know what follow-up you would like.
Okay.
So that we have an opportunity to give that back to you. It may be that we say, let's create a task force and take a look at it, but I'd like to look first at the information before deciding how to move
Now,
forward.
there's another whole set of information, because the information that both Mr. Jimkowski and Stevens have brought up has been brought up to prior boards. We have
That's
a whole
prior-
series of documentation of how we responded to those questions. If you want that, we'll pull it together and give it to you at the same time we give you all their
I think
information.
if we-
I would
we
not
should
like the
review it
responses.
first, yeah.
I don't want the responses, because I don't want any preconceived ideas of
Why
what
don't you
past
send
board
to
members-
us what these two gentlemen
Okay.
send to us? I know that you have historical information that's available for us to reference. I don't want a barrage of email at this point in time with all of that information. Let's review what these gentlemen want to give us, and then we'll come back to you.
Okay,
Does that sound okay, everybody?
Yes, I think
Okay.
that's a great idea.
With that,
okay.
I'd like to move to the second item on the agenda, which is our financial audit, and invite our guests to join us.
Okay, so Jim Lorizada from Moss
Lorizada.
Adams is coming here, and then also we have Keith Simovic here also with us, so, okay, thanks. Do that, and help yourself here. Stacy, were you gonna? Control L. That's big. Yeah, no, it covers our screen, which is what we want.
Kathy, do you know how to make the fan go away? Or is that just as good as it gets?
We have copies, so we're okay.
All right, well, thank you for the opportunity to come before you and talk about the financial statement audit. Wow, a little bit emotional session. I can appreciate that. So there's a lot of ways to evaluate or scorecards on your performance and management's performance. One of those is the financial statement that gets put together annually that displays the transactions of the retirement plan. And you have opted to have an external audit of the accuracy of the financial statements, and that's what Moss Adams provided. So we're going to tell you a little bit about the nature of the services that you asked us to perform, and some of the things that we do with critical areas that we look at within that. Obviously, we want to give you the results of that financial audit. So we'll talk about our reports and opinions. Anytime we do an audit, there are some required communications to those charged with governance. And obviously, that's you as a board. We've done that in a written form in the past, but this is the first time we've come and presented to you orally. So we appreciate the chance to do that. Maybe you have some questions we'd be happy to answer. So we'll just highlight a few of those required communications which have been provided to you already in a written form. So let's kind of walk through it. I guess I would characterize an audit of your financial statements in 4 broad areas. One area you may have a pretty good understanding, which is there's a lot of numbers in these financial statements, balances at a point in time, the revenues that went through, the contributions from property taxes, the benefit payments that went out, those sorts of things. And you probably have an understanding that we look at the source documents to make sure that the information that's reflected in here is supported by the source documents that show the numbers. So you probably understand that pretty well. A second element, though, is anytime you're processing all this volume of activity, it takes internal controls, those checks and balances that management uses to make sure that this information is accurate. So we have an obligation to understand what those internal controls are and to actually determine if they're designed effectively and they're being followed by management. And then if there are weaknesses in those, we have an obligation to tell you about that. Probably a third element is that you have some actuarial work that is critical to your reporting. And so there's a fair amount of testing of the actuarial work that goes into this that is displayed in the footnotes to the financial statements. And then finally, you have staff that put this financial statement together. We don't draft it. It's our job to audit it. But there are requirements in here for this to meet all the bells and whistles of the governmental accounting standards. And so we perform a technical review to make sure that, in fact, this has all of those bells and whistles required by the professional accounting standards. So there's kind of maybe four ways of slicing this to make it a little more interesting to you. So Keith, why don't you jump in a little bit and talk about some of the areas that we focus in our work.
Yeah, and I'll take a step back for just a second.
Is that on?
Can anyone hear me? Is this on?
There you go.
There we go. So I'm going to take a step back for just a minute before we dive into these areas and some of the actual procedures that we go through in looking at some of these areas that we've considered significant audit areas. So at the start of every audit that we do, we take what's known as a risk-based audit approach. And as part of that, we sit down at the beginning of the audit before we're in the field and we talk about where is the risk in our audit procedures? What are the significant transactions during the year? Is there anything new that's occurred that management hasn't had to deal with before from a transaction standpoint? Have there been turnover in management or in the finance individuals responsible for the plan, changes within the board, actions that have been taken by the board throughout the year? So we're going to take a look at a number of different items to say, well, where do we think the risk is? And so through that process, we identify those significant risk areas, and we say this is where we're going to spend the bulk of our time and where we're going to design audit procedures to make sure we've addressed those risks individually. And so we go through and we've laid out over the next couple of slides some of those significant risk areas and the procedures that we've taken to address those risks. So cash and investments is one area that we've designated as a significant audit risk area. And because we're also the auditor for the City of Portland as well, and with the cash and investments being pooled with the City of Portland, through that audit as well, we're doing testing to make sure that we're sending out confirmations to third-party financial institutions. We're doing testing over the valuation of investments within the pooled cash and investments balances as well. And so we're able to get to a point at the end of that to say that the cash and investments that are reported on the plan's financial statements are appropriately stated. Property tax revenues and receivables is another area that we're able to test in conjunction with our testing for the City of Portland's financial report as well. We're able to send out third-party confirmations to all the taxing authorities and able to trace that back to what the city has recorded and then what's been allocated to the plan as part of that process. So we're able to confirm that with third parties. Pension liabilities, as Jim mentioned previously, we spend a fair amount of time looking at the actuarial reports that are involved and those disclosures and the assumptions and estimates that are made within those actuarial reports, because any small changes in those numbers can have a huge impact on what those liabilities are and what they're reported at and what they're disclosed at. So we want to make sure we're taking time to really kick the tires on those, look at what those assumptions are, how have they changed from previous actuarial evaluations, are they appropriate in line with other things that we've seen in other types of pension plans, are they appropriate, can we look at third-party support to support some of those assumptions that the actuary has used. So we're kicking the tires on that and making sure that those assumptions are relevant, they're appropriate, and up to date for the current year. Benefit payments are another area that we spend a lot of time on. We consider that a significant risk area as well. Anytime you have cash going out the door. You want to make sure that there's internal controls in play here to make sure that where that cash is going, it's going to eligible participants, eligible retirees to the plan that is in accordance with the actual plan document, that they're calculated at the correct amount, they're paid at the correct amount, and they're recorded on your financial statements at the correct amount in the correct period as well. So we spend a lot of time in that area. And then financial close-in reporting is a big area, and that goes back to creating this final document. What are all the procedures that management has in place to make sure that they're reconciling accounts, they've booked journal entries appropriately, they've put this together and made sure that they've included all the required disclosures that are required by governmental accounting standards. And so that's another big area that we're looking at, and that's where we're doing our technical review to take a look at that and make sure that all the bells and whistles, as Jim mentioned, are included in those financial statements.
I guess before we move on to reports, I'm just curious if you might have any questions about some of the work that we do or some of those areas that we focus on? Or, okay?
No.
Reserve questions till later? Okay, very good. Keith kind of mentioned it, but a big part of the work that we do is to make sure that what is reflected in the plan is accurate. All that cash comes into the city, the property taxes are collected by the city, and of course they get property taxes to support other activities. So making sure that the portion that belongs to the plan, according to the millage that is unique to the plan, is in fact reflected in your financial statements is a big part of what we do, just as much as the cash that's held by the city, that there are good records in terms of what is the plan's portion of that overall pool, and is that accurately reflected in these financial statements. So that's a good part of some of our work there.
So at the end of that process, we're able to get to the point where we've gathered enough evidence and we can give our final audit reports. And so the two audit deliverables that are included within this financial statement document, the first one is our audit opinion on the financial statements, and we're able to give a clean opinion, an unmodified opinion in auditor speak, on those financial statements for the year ended June 30th, 2018. So that means we believe those statements are free of material misstatement, whether due to error or fraud, and that they're in accordance with governmental accounting standards as well. So that's exactly what you're shooting for. It's something where you may have heard that, not from us. I know this is the first time we've presented to the board directly, but something that you may have heard from management in the past that, yes, here's, we went through our audit, we got another clean opinion, but there's a lot of work that goes into that, and to get to this point takes a lot, not just from our standpoint, but management is going through their internal controls and their processes and procedures and following those throughout the year, and to be able to get to a point where they can put together this document accurately to the point where we come in and we don't find any material errors in that process, I think speaks a lot to the efforts that management has put in and the internal controls that have been put in place as well. So don't want to go that unnoticed. So definitely a lot of work that goes into that. And then finally, we issue a report because of the fact that the plan is part of the city and we're performing the audit in accordance with governmental accounting standards. We issue a separate report that's at the back of these financial statements, and that talks about internal controls and our processes related to internal controls. If we did find something that we would consider a material weakness, that would be something where there was such a hole in internal controls that we believe a material misstatement or material fraud could occur and slip through the cracks without being noticed by the current controls in place. You'd find that in that report, but you'll find that there's no audit findings or material weaknesses noted in that report in the current year.
So that's really good news. So, so the slide that covers the reports just happened in, a minute?
Yeah.
Whatever, but the work on your staff's part in order to get there and under your management shouldn't go unnoticed. It's a lot of effort. The audit effort comes just once a year. We think it's, takes a fair amount of work, but really the work happens day to day by your team, and they do a really good job. And so it's great to be able to come and say no findings and a clean audit opinion on the financials.
And then an additional deliverable that we provide is our communication to those charged with governance. This is a required communication that's required by our current auditing standards. And this is something where we would communicate anything that came up during the audit that is kind of outside the norm and is significant that we feel and that we're obligated to communicate to the board. And so this slide kind of summarizes the key elements of that letter that we issue. I think the key theme here is that there's nothing outside of our standard language that's included in that letter. It was, again, a very clean audit from our standpoint. We didn't note any material adjustments, so once we received all the information, we arrived on site and started digging through all the source documents and tracing that back to what was actually recorded and reported in your financial statements. We didn't find any material errors or adjustments that needed to be posted in order for us to give a clean audit opinion. So,
What's the standard for material adjustment?
Yeah, good question. So most folks that are in the governmental arena apply some sort of a formula to start with to determine what is material to the financial statement. So most auditors will pick a percentage of either revenues or expenses. In your case, it may be the actuarial valuation, at least to evaluate the liability that's reflected in the footnotes. So we start with a percentage of activity that runs through the fund, and then we determine if there's any reason to adjust that that calculation for, other things that may be going on. So it's a calculation that we perform. It's generally based on your revenues and expenditures that run through the plan.
in addition to any audit adjustments being noted in that letter, which again, there aren't any, which is very good and very clean, this is where we would also note any recommendations we had if there were material weaknesses or significant deficiencies in internal controls, holes in internal controls. We would note those in here and have recommendations on how the board could and management could go ahead and address those. But we didn't have anything to note there this year. Again, no material weaknesses. We felt the internal control structure was appropriate and functioned appropriately throughout the year. With that.
Yeah, one thing, on the financial statements, it's interesting that the liability actually calculated by the actuary is not reflected as a liability within the balance sheet here. So it's only a footnote disclosure, but that's an element that is recognized by the city. So the city, as the employer of the police and firemen, they have to pick up that liability on the face of their financial statement. So they're very focused on what that is and want to know that there's accuracy to it. So we spend a fair amount of time in that area. The other thing in your financials that deserves a lot of attention is just the uniqueness of the plan. So Jennifer mentioned the fact that it is a pay-go system, paid with property taxes. That's very unique. You don't see that. I don't even know if we see it anywhere else in the country. And so one of the things that we're concerned about as your auditor is how well is that fact disclosed in here? Could a reader read this document and understand that you have that very unique revenue stream? And would they know what the risks are associated with that? I mean, obviously, if you ran into problems with that millage rate, if you got close to the cap, there is a cap on the rate that you can charge. And if property values dropped and you had to go above that cap to raise the revenue to cover the benefit payments, there's implications to the city. So we spend a fair amount of time to make sure that those risks are adequately disclosed within this document. And I think your management does a really good job. There's several places in here where you will see that information. And the other thing we appreciate is that you do the work to test the assumptions about the property taxes and what's the risk to you that some event could happen in the future where you would be subject to a cap and you wouldn't collect enough property taxes to make those benefit payments. So you've been doing that for a number of years. I think you do that evaluation at least once every 5 years now, maybe sooner or more frequently. So anyway, all of those factors are very well disclosed in these financial statements. And then there, just to keep you apprised, there's a number of accounting standards coming down the pike, and we won't bore you with these, but to let you know that your staff do a good job of staying on top of the new accounting standards. I would say they're very consultative. And so when a new standard comes up that has significance to the fund, we get phone calls and we have meetings, and I appreciate that consultative nature. And then also we see your staff at conferences where they're getting some continuing education about some of these. We put on training ourselves, and we see your staff at our trainings, and so they do a good job of staying on top of these standards. And really just want to again acknowledge, the your staff has to deal with our audit. We come in and hit them at a time when they still have to keep their day job going and facilitate our audit procedures, and they do that very professionally, and appreciate the nature with which they deal with us and facilitate our audit process. So, and with that, I want to make sure if we haven't answered questions of yours that you get a chance.
I have just a couple.
Sure.
I thank you for addressing the comment about the fact that the overall pension and OPEB liabilities are not in these financial statements, because I did find it confusing till I got back to the notes that all of that wasn't reflected. Can you explain, again, in a little bit more detail why that's the
Why
case?
that is? Yeah, good question. So again, it goes back to the accounting standards. So the folks that are responsible for dictating how financial statements go together, they want the trust fund financials themselves just to reflect the activity that runs through there, the cash and investments at the end of the year, and any obligations you have, like if you owed a benefit payment for June and it didn't get paid until July 5th or something, those are the only liabilities that go. So it's the trust fund is more what resources were there at the end of the year, and what's the revenue or contributions that came in, what were the benefit payments that were paid, and what's the ending cash and investments available to fund benefits. That bigger actuarial liability is disclosed in the footnotes, and that liability is picked up by the employer. The plan itself is not the employer of the police and fire. It's the trust fund that holds the resources and makes the benefit payments, but the ultimate obligation is really a city obligation as the employer of those police and firemen.
So if this were a strictly pay-as-you-go plan, had no trust assets, there would not be this financial statement.
Well, you would still show a financial. It just shows the ins and the outs and not much on the balance sheet. And that's, what you see here. There's not much cash reflected in this balance sheet. Most plans are pre-funded. So Oregon PERS is pre-funded. So you'll see way more cash and investments on their balance sheet. Whereas this one, the city charter doesn't enable you to collect that and hang on to it. The cash you're able to collect is just enough to pay the benefits.
For that period.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah.
That explains it. My other question related to, and maybe you'll get to this later. So as part of Oregon PERS and part of the city's retiree medical program, I presume, are proportionate share liabilities, do you look at that as part of this analysis or strictly as part of the city?
Good question. So we do look at it, a piece of it here, but most of that is at the city level. So all of your new firemen that were hired after 2006, I believe it is,
Firefighters.
or members, firefighters and firefighters, excuse me, are going into Oregon PERS. And so you're collecting enough through property taxes to make the contribution to Oregon PERS on their behalf. All of the folks hired before 2007, of course, are still on a pay-go basis. You have employees here that are paid out of this fund. And they are also members of Oregon PERS. And so this financial statement does actually pick up a small obligation as it relates to just the employees that are part of the plan that administer these benefits. So the employees that work here, the folks that are sitting behind us here, their portion of Oregon PERS is reflected in these financials. But the employees of the city that are covered under Oregon, the firefighters after
2006, yeah.
Correct. That obligation is all picked up in the city's financial statements. Because the city pays their salaries, the plan does not. The plan does pay the salaries of the administrative staff that administer the plan, so then this plan statements do pick up their portion of Oregon PERS. Does that make sense?
It does. Thank you.
Confusing.
Congratulations
At
for
best.
answering that question.
Thanks very much.
Any other questions? I'd like to add my thanks to the team for being so diligent and working on everything that's necessary to get these statements put together and the audit done. And anybody that would like a copy of the city's statements, we just got them published. We actually had them published on October 30th, but we have the hard copies available if anybody would like them. So thank you
Okay.
again, and
Thank
for
you.
everybody in your team as well.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you. Okay, our next agenda item, a request of Kyle McLowry, PFFA, to address us. Welcome. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Kyle McLowry. I'm a firefighter. I work at Station 28 in the Hollywood District, Portland. And I'm joined today by Colin Beeson. He's Director of Operations for Dura Health. I want to thank you very much for the opportunity to present this program to you that Colin and his colleague Randy have developed for Portland Fire. And as you can see from the document in front of you, this is about a request for a rehab specialist to be added to Portland Fire, okay? I'm very excited to start this conversation and this process, hopefully this potential partnership between Fpdr, Dura Health, and Portland Fire. The lion's share of this presentation will be done by Colin, and it's by no means not lost on me that the critical information that you're going to be looking for and needing to make a decision about entering into this partnership is going to be coming from the science and the success in the data that he has in his presentation, his PowerPoint. I wanted to just take a few minutes to share a firefighter's perspective on the program that Dura Health is put together for the Portland Fire.
And I have a quick,
Yes.
a quick question. When you introduced this, you said that you would be talking about a request for a rehab specialist to be added to, did you say FPDR or to Portland Fire?
For Portland Fire,
Okay,
yes.
great, thank you. Okay.
So I wanted to share this perspective as a firefighter, as someone who is familiar with the work that Dura Health does. I've been to and seen their facility at the Air National Guard Base, which is one of their main locations in Portland, and it's impressive to say the least. And it was very abundantly clear to me that the significant positive impact a program like this can have for our membership, and in turn for FPDR in a reduction in injury claims. And that's sort of one of the key points that I'm making here. I don't know how familiar you all are with the job description, the duties, the day-to-day operations, and the stressors involved with being a firefighter, the physical stressors over the weeks, months, years on the job. But what I can tell you is that we are industrial athletes. And the culture here in Portland is one that takes fitness and health very seriously. And we're very serious about being prepared physically, mentally, and tactically for whatever happens, whatever we face on a 24-hour shift. And being a industrial athlete, we're continually working through, like any athlete, working through injuries. And what I'm talking about, mostly minor injuries. You know, we have a lot of shoulders, back, and knee injuries, but I see these minor injuries that we're constantly working through as the building blocks of future injury claims. And there's 1,000 different ways I could get injured on a fire scene or a car accident or lifting a patient, or for that matter, just working out, lifting weights, trying to keep fit. And we're constantly very committed to maintaining and increasing strength, mobility, cardiovascular abilities. But to have a resource that Colin's going to talk about for, let's say I tweak my back, lifting the patient, coming off shift, the ability to go to a Dura Health facility or a location to get a little treatment, maybe come back a couple days later, is something that would reap dividends for me and the ability to do my job, and I believe reap dividends for the fund in reducing injury claims. So I see this as very much a win-win situation, and I'm very passionate about that preventative aspect of this program. I think a big part of it also is the rehab part that Colin's going to talk about, which they've been very successful in getting people that are off on injury claims rehabbed and back to work in a much quicker fashion, which is better for us. You know, whenever I've been through one injury so far, and it's it's really a drag. It's no fun, and we want to just get back to regular life and back to work. And they've been able to be very successful in making that time frame quicker. Of course, that's better for us and better for the board, for the trust, in that you have shorter injury claims. So that's my little firefighter's perspective. I'm going to turn it over to Colin, and thank you.
Good afternoon, trustees. My name is Colin Beeson, Director of Operations for Duro Health. A quick background on Duro Health. So we're an occupational medicine company that really has its foundation rooted in the industrial athlete, and that came from both Randy and my experience in sports growing up. And so Duro's mission is to take the industrial athlete, our biggest customer right now is the Department of Defense, take the men and women that put their life on the line and make sure that we're doing everything that we can to treat the injuries that they have, and then proactively apply exercise and different systems to prevent injuries. So it's kind of a two-pronged approach, and you'll see a little bit more about that. See if we can get this.
There you go.
There we go. So in speaking with Kyle and many of our mutual friends that are in Portland Fire, a huge issue is the delay in starting treatment. Injury happens, and usually there's no resource to seek treatment. Typically, you see 2 weeks to get into your primary care doc. They usually want to order physical therapy, which could take another 2 to 4 weeks to start. If that doesn't work, then an MRI. So all of a sudden, you're looking at an 8-week window where true treatment hasn't begun yet, because of kind of the process that our health system provides right now. The other issues are, when they do get hurt, how do they maintain their fitness while still working? Oftentimes these claims can take someone out of work, and all of a sudden they're not doing their job, they're not working out, and really they lose all connection to the physical demands of the job as they are. The decreased quality of life, the testimony of retirees, clearly there's a physical impact. Our focus is the musculoskeletal impact, but clearly there's this physical impact on our first responders, and then the escalating financial burden to the city associated with injury and disability claims. So that's the problem. The solution that we've used in our locations is really an on-site immediate access model. For Portland Fire specifically, the location of this rehab specialist could really be up to the Portland Fire Department in terms of which firehouse they're located at, or a location somewhere in Portland that's accessible to all the firefighters. Injuries, our goal is to treat them within 48 hours. We call that the golden window. If we can treat an injury within 48 hours, we can expedite the recovery process by anywhere between 2 to 4 weeks. Our systems are rooted in kind of best practice methodology. We take data all the time, so if the best practice isn't working for a specific population, our data should show us both internal and external changes to our systems that can provide better treatment. And the why the data, our quarterly injury trending metrics, which Duro is in the process of patenting, is kind of where we really root our focus in terms of how we provide these services to the best of our ability. So the injury intervention phase takes three different approaches. You have primary intervention, secondary intervention, tertiary intervention. They're pretty self-explanatory. The primary intervention is basically a healthy first responder. Secondary intervention is a first responder who has been injured, but they still continue to do their job. And then the tertiary intervention is where the injury or the disease state truly limits their performance. And our programs serve to treat every single case, primary, secondary, or tertiary. And again, that is the treatment phase, but also the prevention phase. So the primary intervention is developing exercise protocols that hopefully will prevent the healthy first responders, firefighters in this case, from getting hurt. Secondary intervention is keeping people who are hurt but still able to do their job fit Again, when your shoulder hurts, you're not going to want to work out. So how can we mitigate that pain, keep you fit to do your job? And then tertiary intervention, when the injury or the disease truly has taken them off the line, how do we best treat that person to get them back and operating efficiently? So our solution description is this direct care model. It's essentially taking a training room atmosphere within the sports model and applying it directly to the industrial athlete. So again, this treatment, you don't need to schedule an appointment. You just show up at the clinic and receive treatment on the spot. You have unlimited access, so there's no visit limitations. Treatment can occur as many times as you'd like during the day, during the week, during the month. For someone who's off duty, they may come in 3 to 4 times a day to receive treatment. For someone who is healthy but just wants to do some preventative exercise, they can come by once, twice a week, maybe even once a month, depending on kind of how their biometric assessment is. Our care plans are tailored to the individual, so there's not going to be blanket treatment for the entire force. For those people, depending on, again, primary, tertiary, or secondary or tertiary injury, the care plans are built specifically for them. So again, we're going to take systems that work for prevention or for rehabilitation and apply them directly to the injured party. And then all of our injury prevention systems are dictated by our data. So we're going to find out which injuries are occurring the most, and then to the healthy firefighters, we're going to apply exercises and basically preventative methodology to hopefully prevent that rotator cuff injury from happening when they're pulling a hose. Additional solutions that this rehabilitation specialist model includes our care coordination, HIPAA compliant documentation, and injury and disability claim support. We have specialists on staff at Duro Health to basically help with this process. That can be a job in itself, and oftentimes is a huge deterrent towards these injured parties looking for help in the first place. Oftentimes just the burden of scheduling an appointment with a specialist can be kind of a monumental task. We have nutritional counseling, and then additional programs, sleep hygiene, concussion, and heat tolerance. So we look to apply direct rehabilitation and then provide other services to, again, treat everyone in the force, not just the ones that are hurt. Our systems are a turnkey operation. We provide all necessary equipment, the facilities, if necessary, trained practitioners, our metrics, and then care coordination and claim resources. And this leads us to kind of the future state for the partnership between Portland Fire and Duro Health. Our goal is to increase firefighter career retention, with a firefighter being worth, at a tenured point in their career, over $2.5 million. 30 year. Yeah. $2.5 million. Keeping one firefighter from early retirement, early disability can pretty much provide a return on investment immediately. At Robins Air Force Base, we implemented this same program, working on the maintainers that overhaul all the airplanes down there, and we were able to give them a return on investment 25 times their initial investment. We saved them over $24 million in a period of 2 years. We want to, with the increased duration, that $2.5 million investment, and that's a conservative estimate, will save retraining costs and lost productivity. Partial duty limitations can prove to be catastrophic to any department. You still have a body that you're paying, but you're not getting full work out of them. And then the disability costs on the back end, keeping someone from having a full disability claim, or to the extent in which they never sought treatment during their career, the disability claims can be exponentially growing because of that. And then most importantly on our end, the human element, improving their quality of life into retirement. We truly, it sounds cliche, but we truly take pride in providing service and really this healthcare source to these industrial athletes, and really making sure that they feel better while they're working, but when they go home at night. Kyle had told me that Portland Fire right now has 120 open claims. Our goal would be to decrease those claims by 40% in year 1 and by 60% in year 2. Those are the goals that we kind of put out for Duro Health when we do this. Some testimony, we've had great success, like I said, with our operations. Currently, we have 8 contracts in the Department of Defense, working mainly with special operations and combat aviation pilots. So this is a testimony from someone at the Oregon Air National Guard that's experienced our services, and we're just privileged to be able to help the people who really, truly need it. And again, my name's Colin Beeson, Director of Operations, and Randy Ziobro couldn't be here today. He is the CEO of Duro Health.
And I would just add to that, this is, as I said, essentially an initial conversation. We want to start the process. The formal request, the written request, will be, Sam has offered some help with some of the staff. It's something that will be forthcoming shortly, but this was an opportunity to bring this to your attention. If you have any questions, we'd be happy to field them. If not, we can get that formal request in as soon as possible.
Thank you for the presentation. Thank you for following up with Sam. Have you made any presentation within PF&R?
Have I?
Yeah. Has
Meg-
any of this been brought to fire at all?
To fire. We're making it specifically to FPDR as the entity that is dealing with injury claims and disability. So it has not been, that's why we're making it today here. I'm not sure if that answers your question.
So there hasn't been a presentation or a discussion with Chief Myers at this point?
Not at this point.
Okay. And how much of this is applicable to our force in blue, or is this specific to fire?
I would say 100% applicable. I don't speak for the police.
But it's
I'm
just
yeah.
coming through you
Yes.
as a member of PFNR?
Yes, and I mean, I've originally met the Duro Health through some of the firefighters that I know who are in the military, and have had amazing success with them for their injuries. So that's sort of what led me down this path.
And not to get into something that you might consider proprietary, but with no visit limitation and with a workforce that, works 24/7, how do you price?
So, basically, we take a price that can really sustain our operations, and then everything on top of that is cost saving to the city, to the taxpayer. With the logistics of our services at the 8 clinics that we have right now at the DOD, we've got a pretty good handle on how much load one practitioner could take. And in further discussions with Portland Fire, we can determine how much access they want.
Do you provide 24/7?
So right now, our services, they're night flying out at Portland International Guard Base, and so we're there at midnight tonight.
So you do?
Yeah, so it shifts. We wouldn't be there for 24 hours a day, but we would determine the high volume times.
And I guess my question is, is your pricing based on the number of signed-up potential users? Or is it a forecast of what the load might be?
Yes, both.
The la-
But more so the latter.
Okay.
Again, speaking with Portland Fire, if we have one central location,
Right.
the usage from the kind of the peripheral isn't going to be as much. So it kind of depends on the model that we would want to apply.
There's a couple of different options we've been talking about for the model. I think that may be a detail that is still in the works.
Yeah, it may be premature for me to be asking that question, but when I see no visit limitation with all the discussion about healthcare these days, it just starts to beg a whole lot of questions about how you can do this in a sustainable way that still is providing a service that is worthy of investing in.
It's much like a capitation model of healthcare, where you have a flat service and basically, it's on Duro Health to make sure that we do our homework to make sure that the logistics match up. But we've had great success, like I said, at our 8 other clinics in terms of managing the patient flow to not just effectively make a profit or survive financially, but operationally. If we're only seeing 5% of the workforce, then we're not doing our job. So we find a way logistically to make it work.
I'm sorry. Just one quick question. Practically, is there a practitioner involved with every visitor, every employee, every time they come in? Or is it sort of a monitoring, as needed engagement with someone?
It depends on the plan of care. For all evaluations, obviously, there's a practitioner available. For a healthy operator who may just want to go get a workout in, there may not be as much intervention there. But we pride ourselves on being available either in person or remote for every encounter.
I had a similar question, and that is, so what is the practitioner? Is this a medical doctor, or what's the expertise there?
Usually it's an athletic trainer with a physical therapy and oversight. Athletic trainer is a more affordable model, which is part of how we make it work, but with physical therapist oversight.
Oversight, and what is the oversight? You mean they're on call, or they're also present?
Present, reviewing chart notes, reviewing documentation, assessing evaluations. It really becomes kind of a team element. When you go to a physical therapy clinic, you usually have a physical therapist, a PT aide, and maybe a couple other auxiliary members kind of doing your stuff, doing your rehabilitation, and that's kind of what we develop.
Okay.
And does every station, responding station, have workout facility currently?
Yes.
Okay. Great. And Sam, there's a process that we can help guide this inquiry through, right?
Yes,
That you're
I shared it
available?
with both you and Kyle, is what we're going to do is we have a form of asking, it's sort of a grant request. It asks a lot more specific questions about it, some of the financials, some of the data, how we're going to measure how the program's going to run. So what we'll do is Kyle and I'll get together and start the process through creating that document. I do have several other questions about this, as we've heard. I think, how to work with the Fire Bureau is going to be very important, because they're the one, you're working with their employees, and how do we do that, and how do you get them back to work? We're going to have to see how this meshes with our disability plan, because we're required to have physician oversight. So those are just a lot of details. Procurement may have to come into the mix, because if we're going to have an outside vendor come in here, we have to go through that. So there's quite a few processes that we have to look through to make this happen. And the goal is to come with a complete presentation to you that gets down into these details and actually describes the ask and the money for the ask.
And the process.
In the process.
Okay.
And one of the things that this does, and you've seen he's presented it, is that the only way that Fpdr is allowed to pay for programs like this is that you have to show cost savings in disability benefits. That's pretty specific, and that's what his goal is, so that it appears that this program goes that direction. But we'll define this in a lot more detail, what the ask is, the processes are, who's got what responsibility for what type of location, and who's paying who and how much, and all that type of stuff will be worked out for the final.
And when do you think you might come back to us?
That'll be the challenge, because the next board meeting is January. That's quite a bit of work to do in a short period of time. I'll talk with Kyle, see if we can get that, or it would then be March, would be the next board meeting after that. So we'll see what we can target.
Do you anticipate implementing this on a pilot kind of project first?
Well,
or
that'll
just
be
all the way?
part of, that's
Okay.
part of what will come out with the ask in the request.
Mm-hmm.
Is what it'll do, and what will be the short-term and long-term commitments potentially for this, who maintains and runs the program, et cetera. So there's quite a bit of things, details to work out. And I think, I don't think it'll be tremendously hard to get a lot of the answers to those questions. We just want to get them put together in the package. And then if we're looking for how to reduce FPDR claims, we need to understand what the data is, what we have now as a baseline, and what we're really targeting, and confirming that that's the goals that we want to go for, that we can attain.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Appreciate your coming in and speaking with us, and thank you for all the information you shared.
Absolutely.
Of course, thank you.
Okay. Opioid study results. Who is presenting this next item?
Myself and Kim.
Okay.
Kim, if you want to.
Click it.
Ready?
Okay, so FPDR opioid study. Why we did this is everybody's heard a lot about the opioid epidemic. Should just be able, just scroll it. Don't roll it up to the next slide. It rolls instead of advances. Don't know why.
You said it
Just
does roll.
roll it. Okay, here we go. And so you can see from a lot of figures, I'm not going to go over this, each one of these lines, but 130 people die every day from opioid-related drug overdoses. 2 million people misuse prescription opioids, and 2.1 million basically have opioid addiction. So this is a tremendously big problem. You hear about it in the news a lot. So we wanted to see how this is impacting FPDR, and we'll show you the questions that we are looking to investigate here in just a minute. But I do want to give you a quick history of the opioids, because this is pertinent to some of the data that you'll see. In the 1980s, prior to the 1980s, pain management was not on a lot of physicians' and doctors' radar. A lot of it was tough it out, deal with it. But they're beginning to have studies showing that persistent pain actually delayed recovery, or people failed to recover. So they decided we need to manage pain. Well, the easiest way to manage pain was let's give them a pill, an opioid. And basically, it was so easy to do, nobody really looked at other mechanisms to manage or control pain. And sort of you see the mantra here, it says more pain, give more meds. So it was just really use opioids, easy to do with it. In the 1990s, the pharmaceutical companies actually had some studies, I put it in quotes in my notes here, that showed that opioid use for people in pain was non-addictive. And so they continued to push opioid management versus alternative pain management strategies. And during the 1990s, along with this, the Oregon Medical Board actually disciplined a physician for not prescribing enough opioids. So it was really the push. The 80s and 90s were the go-go years for opioids. You're in pain, take a pill. You're in pain, take a bigger pill. You're in pain, take more pills. And that was how they treated pain. And so in the early 2000s, it was dawning on people that opioids were becoming addictive, even for those people on pain. And it seemed obvious, but it took to the early 2000s for this to happen. So you started to see some behavior changes through the 2000s in this. In the next slide, you'll see here that 2017 and 18 were some laws that were passed both state and federally to try to address how opioids are prescribed. In 2017, the Department of Health and Human Services declared the public emergency of opioid addiction. They came out with a 5-point strategy to combat the crisis, was to improve access to treatment and recovery resources, to promote use of overdose reversing drugs, that's the Narcan or naloxone that you hear so much about. This is poorly written, but this is a direct quote from them, is strengthening our understanding of the epidemic through better public and health surveillance. I put in parentheses, this was really meant to get better data. Doctors weren't sharing data, hospitals weren't sharing data. HIPAA was seen as a barrier to doing that, so they're trying to figure out how can we get around this and get more data on how opioids are prescribed and used. They wanted to provide more support for cutting-edge research on pain and addiction, and they want to advance better practices for pain management, and there should be alternative to opioid practices for pain management. 2017, Oregon passed a law directing the various medical boards to provide their practitioners with guidelines and recommendations for use of opioids. This was a very passive approach. Many states in 2015, 16, and 17 are actually passing hard laws of here's how many opioids you can prescribe for how long. Workers' compensation systems were doing that. Oregon chose the more passive and what you would call sort of directive and educational route. I was skeptical of it, but I think as you'll see some of our results and some of the other results in the state, it seems to be working because I think physicians took the message to heart. And then just earlier this year, President Trump signed the Support for Patients and Communities Act. It's a little bit better described in its subtitle, the Substance Use Disorder Prevention that Promotes Opioid Recovery and Treatment for Patients and Communities Act. It's basically what the U.S. government is going to do to promote the prevention, education, treatment, reporting, and measurements of opioid use. It's interesting, you look at the act, it's 250 pages long. I have a 26-page summary. And the act is broken in what they call titles. There's 8 titles. 5 of them talk about how Medicaid and Medicare can better support these points. They're actually government-funded programs directing them how to better support people with addiction, how to better prevent prevention, education, and reporting and measurements. The others apply in general. There is some control being applied to pharmaceutical companies with that. So that's all the background. So again, come back to why we're doing this study. We wanted to answer these 2 questions. What impact has the opioid epidemic had on the FPDR fund? And how are opioids impacting the FPDR members receiving benefits? We're starting with looking at data today. We didn't want to go historical. We're looking at today. What is happening today with opioid use and giving us a baseline so we can continue to measure it going forward. So the methodology we did was we compiled and reviewed data for all prescription reimbursements and payments made by the fund in 2018 up through November 19th. We compared payments for opioid prescriptions to payments for all other prescriptions. And we identified members with the highest prescription and opioid costs with that. And that's a very revealing slide when we get there. So for the results, on the first page, pretty straightforward. We had 63 members submit 887 prescriptions for non-opioid drugs, and we paid $190,000 for those. We had 28 members submit 262 invoices for about $36,000 cost in opioids. Now, I have 71 as a total. That's not right if you do your math. It's 91, but if you look down at the fine print below it, 20 of the members submitted both opioid and non-opioid costs. So that's how we come up with 71 different periods. So that just gives you a quick splash at the cost. If we go to the next one, we break that down a little.
Just to clarify.
Okay.
You are looking at invoices so that a refill is considered, each refill is separate?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, every time somebody asks for payment, or we do have some pharmacy companies that fill and then submit us the bill for the things. So we go over to the next one here, taking the same data and just put some percentages to it. So 77% of the prescriptions we fill are for non-opioids, 23% are opioids. So about a quarter, is that high? I'm just sort of thinking, a quarter of the meds that are prescribed are opioids. That seems a little bit high to me. But interesting on the next line, even though 23% are opioids, only 16% of the cost goes to opioids. Opioids are not expensive in the scheme of things as far as pharmaceuticals go.
And I'm struck with the average invoice. That seems high if you're getting generic. Do we track or know generic
Part of it
versus
is remember, we're paying 100% of the cost.
Right.
So most people who go to the drugstore and get it filled, you're only paying the copay, and you may not be aware of what the cost of the drug is behind. Yes, these will be, for the most part, are generic. But you have to remember, some of these invoices can be for 30 or even up to 90 days worth of pills.
Okay.
So that's the difficult part is we aren't doing this per tablet prescribed or per dosage. This is per invoice. So the invoice can be larger than 30 days, go up to 90 days. And it is sort of what I'm saying when you go to the drugstore. If you've ever seen your drugs priced at a drugstore, you'll be quite amazed, rather than just the copay. They purposely don't show you that on your bill, how much the underlying cost is with that. Okay, so, but opioids, this is just the drug. This is just the pills or patches, whatever people are using. There are a lot of hidden opioid costs that we can't track, but we know are out there. So everybody who's receiving the opiates has their primary medical disabling condition. That's why they're on claim with us. Opioids have been shown to prolong recoveries or even prevent recovery, and recovery being to the point where they can go out and be somewhat productive in outside part-time job, volunteer, but some of these people. So opioids have that. So we could be paying claims longer because of the use of opioids. comorbid conditions, and a condition that's associated with the primary condition, those can be exacerbated by opioids. Some of those conditions may be minor, but you take opioids, they become bigger, and they actually impact, again, their ability to recover. Opioids have significant side effects. Most of them are gastrointestinal. Constipation's a big one. You see a lot of TV commercials for that one. Perpetual nausea, or a whole host of other stomach and bowel problems. Men tend to have another layer of issues on top of that, and that's depression, fatigue, and sexual dysfunction. So these are all conditions that they may be taking the non-opioid prescriptions for to deal with these conditions. So that's why we said 20 people are taking both. Well, there's a chance that some of those prescriptions for the non-opioids are to cover these side effects. And then there's hardware. We are paying for a pain pump for one of our members, a morphine pain pump, and so that's a cost that doesn't show up in this study. So again, all these secondary things do result in additional treatment, prescription costs, and potentially additional time loss for delay.
Can you clarify the disability column? What are those numbers? Is that months on disability or
Are you on
days?
the next page there?
Which one? Go back.
Okay, you're one page ahead, okay.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, I thought,
No, I was over here on this one with the percentages.
oh,
You can see the one on the screen. Okay, anyway, so I'll flip over here. Let me walk you through this slide, and then we'll hopefully answer this question. So remember, one of the things that we did is I have to get my slide person in line with me. This is the one we're on right now. Okay, good. So what we wanted to do is isolate who uses opioids the most of the people that do have opioids. So what we did is we tried to list all the members that had 10 or more opioid invoices for the time period of the study. And you have 13 people fall under that, 13 of the total of 28 people that had prescription medications or opioid prescriptions. So we'll go through here. So the program, all but one are Fpdr2. For the upper group, there's two groups. The upper group here, it's roughly half fire, half police. This is the age today, under this age column. And you'll see the ages today for the youngest person is 46, the oldest is 87, average is 65, and most of the people are in their 60s. The disability, this is when the original disability for what we're paying for started. This is how many years ago, or how many years basically they've been on claim.
So it's years, not months.
It's years. So this is it's pretty interesting with this particular group. So if you look at the disability, 27 years ago takes you when? 1990, dead center in the middle of the go-go period for opioids. So most of all these people on this chart started receiving opioids during the go-go period and have been receiving opioids at, as you can see off to the side, how many invoices some of them have had, high volume of opioids during this time period.
So
And
the
these
invoices
people,
numbers is from January 1 to November 19.
yeah,
So the 30 represents this year.
this year,
This
this
year.
11 and a half months
and,
with it. So again, this is just what happened this year. We didn't go historical on any of these things too.
and why are the two folks at the bottom in a separate
Well,
table?
I'll go over that in a
Okay.
minute, so if you take a look at this top 11, the total cost of opioids we paid is $31,470. Remember, our total opioid cost is $36,000. So almost all the opioid costs are going to these first 11 people. The bottom two people are people, it's interesting, because if you look at this top group, they're all about in their 60s and been on claim for 20 some odd years. Then you have these two outliers at the bottom. Both of those have only been on claim for 2 to 3 years. So the interesting part about it is anybody who's been on claim between 3 years and 18 years is not appearing on the high-use opioid list here. And that 18 years ago starts what? 2000, when you saw the attitude change by the physicians of how they stopped overprescribing opioids. So you see a very dramatic change in high use of opioids around 2000. You have the two people here, both of them are taking the lowest possible dose of an opioid that's out there. We have spoken with our MCOs, just to have them making sure that they're working with the physician, that these people are getting appropriate care and are under the appropriate pain management program. The MCOs do that. You require a pain management that has to include more than just opioids. So they'll be looking at this, and you hope that these people will be weaned back off the opioids and won't be on this list perpetually.
So, I might have missed it.
Okay.
So the disability column, in the last group, it's got a 2 and a 3. What does that represent?
2 years or 3 years on claim.
Is that on claim? That whole column
Well,
is on
they're
claim?
actually, okay, this is when their disability began, how many years ago the
Many years
disability
ago, okay.
began.
I thought somebody
I
said
should say,
age,
let's
so-
put that there.
Okay.
So the two at the bottom are only 2 and 3 years. The next step is 18 years. So we have this huge gap of 15 years to where we don't have anybody that is on high volumes of opioids, which is exciting to me. And this really tells us a lot here that for our newer disabled people, we're not seeing opioid overusage. The MCOs are doing an excellent job, and I'm stealing some of Kim's thunder, of controlling opioids. We're going to continue to watch this and see if this changes and we have more people that come on it. Now, if we take a look at the 11 people up here in that upper one, that's not unique to Fpdr. Oregon Medicaid was talking about this a few months ago, and they were thinking, well, gee, for this group of people, we're going to put rules in to cut their opioid use in half immediately. Well, everything hit the fan because people who've been on opioids this long, you just can't wean them off overnight. There's a whole big process to go through, and frankly, some of these people will never be off opioids. It's just they've been using such high level for such a long period of time. So we've seen some, I'll go to Mr. Chimkowski. He made the comment that he's doing some less on opioids because his doctor is providing him other types of treatments and seeing what he can do to reduce his use of opioids. Some of the other doctors are doing it, but for the most part, I expect those people to be receiving opioids.
And did you select 10 because we were looking at a 10-month period?
There's sort of a natural break in 10 because you had the 10, but then everybody else after that's 2, 3, or 4 pieces. It was just, if you look at the graph, it would just sort of be a point to where about it climbed up. It was just a visual.
I'm looking at 10 and I'm thinking, okay, we don't know if the invoice is for 30 days or 90 days.
Correct.
And 10 might mean once a month for this period that we're covering. But it could be that they're invoices for a 90-day period.
Correct.
But without, assume, there'd have to be controls, actually, that prevent that from happening. So, okay.
With the MCO has controls over that. That's why you're not seeing the people since 2000.
Right.
A lot of if you take, here's what I'd be more concerned about is the person with 30 invoices during this time period. The reason why some of these people have high, they are on 3 to 4 different opioids at the same time.
Yeah.
It's amazing to see what they're doing. And part of it is we have to trust that their physician is doing the guidance. We can, at times, get some people to review these claims and maybe make suggestions, but we really don't, because most of these doctors are non-MCO, because these people became disabled before MCOs, so they've been having these doctors for years with that. So, it's not that we're ignoring this group. I mean, we're monitoring them, and Kim will go over a little bit with it. But this group up here takes, I said this 13 takes 87% of the opioids costs. That's a pretty big set. And so we focused on it. But we're glad to see is that after 2018, or 18 years ago, about 2000, we're not seeing this huge problem of people being on high levels of opioids for long periods of time with that. So.
Okay, and one of the other things I would like to add about this group here that we've highlighted is that these are members who have had really catastrophic injuries, multiple surgeries. They are in a class of people with more severe injuries and have resulted in their inability to return to police or fire work. So this isn't looking at this with a snapshot of people who have had injuries and had recovery of short duration. These are very serious injuries, and And again, surgeries, multiple surgeries in some cases. So the fact that they have been on claim for that length of time and have been taking these medications that length of time is just suggestive of the severity of their injury and the chronic nature of their recovery. So we'll do the next slide. So why the decline in opioid prescriptions? As Sam mentioned earlier, more recently, there has been federal and state legislation aimed at tackling the opioid crisis, period. Legislation has taken the form of support for opioid users in an attempt to decrease their dependence on opioids. And the legislators have worked with the medical community and providers to come up with stricter guidelines for dispensing of opioid medications. And so there is that combination of the legislators' efforts, the medical community efforts, and the overall greater awareness of the impact of opioids and the opioid epidemic that has resulted in the start of a decline in the prescribing of opioids. One of the things we're fortunate to have is we do contract with 2 managed care organizations, and they each have their approach to the opioid epidemic, and they have consulted with the Oregon Medical Board, the American Pain Society, and other organizations who have initiated training for their providers as they're working to treat workers, injured members, and then prescribe opioids. So some of the things they've done is they've limited prescription opioid to short-term duration, and those are typically your hydrocodone with acetaminophen, and they are the very low-cost opioids, but again, short duration. They've initiated the lowest potency recommendations, again, maybe the 5 milligrams, very low doses. They've also worked to ensure that dosing is targeted to specific acute or chronic conditions, so making sure they tailor the opioid to the nature of the condition. And they've also initiated plans to discontinue opioid use and to utilize non-narcotic medications to treat residual pain, non-steroid anti-inflammatories, and other types of pain medication to address their pain. And then they've also worked to facilitate clinical consultation with and referral to pain management providers, and these are doctors who specialize in treatment of pain management. And actually, several of the members in this group that we've highlighted here are under the supervision of pain management doctors who are trained to deal with chronic pain and carefully structure the opioids that are given to address that pain. And the other thing that they have instituted is the utilization of other pain management options, physical therapy, acupuncture, steroid injections, and other therapies. So they do look for other ways to address pain, and it's been very successful. One of the other things that I've noticed since being here in 2008, and the other analysts have noticed, is that our members play an important role in the decline of opioid use. We see in a lot of the chart records where the police and fire members have refused to take opioids. They are concerned about the impact that it has on their ability to do their jobs well and to recover. So often, an opioid that may be suggested during the office visit is refused by our membership. And that's not something you commonly see in an occupational setting, occupational injury setting. So that is something that is important and is recognized with our members. So what actions would we take as a result of this view of opioid use with our membership? One of the things we want to do is continue the study and use this as another tool to identify prescription use overall and the potential for abuse of opioids and other drugs prescribed for pain management. We want to continue the existing practice of our analyst, which is to review medical records and to reach out to the medical providers, our members, to ensure that treatment and including prescription drug use is adhered to as prescribed and supports recovery, not dependency. This is part of our work as analysts, is just to make sure that the care that the doctor has prescribed for our members are being adhered to, and that there are not any increases or prolonging without the governance of the doctor and making sure that all is going as it should be to promote recovery and not dependency. One of the things we also do is we initiate MCO involvement. So if we find a case where we're concerned that there may be some lean to dependency, we want to get the MCO involved to consult with the attending physician and have that conversation about the care, where it's going, and make sure that they are identifying and creating a plan to address those concerns, or tell us that maybe everything is okay. But we do have ways and methods in place to make sure that we are putting forth additional oversight if we recognize the potential for prescription abuse. And the other thing that we work to do is support other means of pain management, such as use of physical therapy, acupuncture, stimulators, injections, and non-opioid pain medication. One of the things that we work to do as part of our charter obligation is to make sure that treatment is reasonable and necessary. So we work with our managed care organizations to make sure that any of the alternative therapies are going to work. And in many cases they do, but it is something we want to make sure that is explored, that they look at other methods to address the pain instead of resorting to drugs first. And so answers to why the study. What impact has the opioid epidemic had on the fund and its members? Well, we see what we have presented here with the numbers. Some of the things that we looked at from a claim standpoint is that the use of opioids in claims often is a component where we have an extended duration of the claim. So typically they are chronic injuries, catastrophic injuries, but often the one common thing among claims that have extended duration is the opioid use as a pain management option. So we know that that is one of the things that we want to watch for. If we see opioid use, the impact on extending the life of the claim is something that we look for. There's also additional costs for treatment. We talked about the pain management professionals. They are additional doctors, and they work in conjunction with the attending physician on the claim to monitor the drug use. So that is an extra cost when you compare that to a claim where opioid use is not a factor. So we're paying for 2 doctors instead of 1. And so sometimes, again, we'll incur additional costs for that. We also have additional medical management, and that is really vigilance on part of the disability staff when reviewing medical records to identify claims where opioid prescriptions continues beyond the initial recommended dose, and then work to initiate consultation to address the impact of opiate use on the members and their recovery. So that's some of the impact to Fpdr, and certainly there's an impact to our members. A dependence on medication on the pain medication is always of concern. Members with chronic conditions who have used opioid risk becoming dependent on opioids for pain management, and that again is something that's always monitored. The need to take supplementary medications, I think as Sam alluded to, and as Mr. Jimkowski had alluded to here, a lot of times they have to take other medications to treat the side effects of the opioids. So that's something where a member will incur additional out-of-pocket costs to pay for more medications, even if it's reimbursed under the plan. The first occurrence in picking up the prescription usually is that they have to pay those out-of-pocket costs. So there are more costs for them up front, even when reimbursed. And then the impact that none of us want to see, but the possibility is that there is a decline in overall health and the quality of life. It is not the opioids exclusively, it's just a component, but these people are dealing with chronic pain. The opioids can take a life of its own, and they're having to manage that as well. So it is something that we are constantly watching for when we're managing these claims and utilizing the tools that we have in place to try to mitigate the suffering and the loss that can come from an extended life and use of opioids. One of the things that I had read in just looking over so much data about opioid use in the workers' compensation setting is that the National Council on Compensation and Insurance felt that the workers' compensation arena was the was better off than the public at large in handling the opioid crises. And a lot of that is because of the oversight. We have people looking at these claims constantly. We have the analysts looking at the records to make sure there aren't issues. We have the managed care organizations and the providers that have a lot of governance, and then the doctors who have governance. So it does help to support what we found here, is that there's just this really large gap from the time where opioid was a prescription of choice to how it is being utilized and managed now. And we think that we have some success in that.
Thank you. Quick question, when the first sub-point on this page, extending the duration of the claim, are we implying causality?
No. Usually
Okay.
causality is already addressed. It's
Right.
just that the chronic nature of their claim, when opioids are infused into the picture as part of the treatment, tend to extend the life of the claim. There are a lot of factors that can contribute to that. Some is a dependence on that as a pain management method, but
There are other factors there as well.
so many factors, yes.
Okay, great. Any questions from fellow trustees? Thank you. Appreciate all the work and the research that went into that study. Appreciate
And we'll
your-
continue to run this, and if you want, we can give you like just an annual rundown of some of the numbers and a quick recap. So we could show up like them.
I would be interested in learning more about the extended claim duration. I hear what you're saying, which is it's complex, and we don't necessarily have causality that we can prove. But to me, that would be likely a much bigger cost than the prescription costs overall.
Okay.
I did have one other question. How receptive are claimants, the disabled employees, about other alternative pain management methods? Are they, because as Sam started off initially, take a pill and you'll feel better is, it's an easy initial solution.
Right.
But how receptive do claimants tend to be about?
They really are very receptive, and as we talked about here, a lot of them refuse opioids, and so that means they are using other methods. They're asking for acupuncture treatment or other therapies or using over-the-counter medication, so they are receptive, and a lot of time they are initiating that before we get involved, because we're seeing that in the early charts of their claims. So.
I'm with them on that. That's usually my approach. But so for existing, but for someone on an existing claim, are you, if you're approaching them as saying, hey, you're one of these folks with, with a high number of invoices, et cetera. So for someone that's been using opioids for a time, are they receptive to other alternatives?
Not as much.
Okay.
Not as much. And that's why we work with the pain management doctors and their attending physicians who are all trying to find alternative methods, but a lot of times they are resistant because they have been on the opioids for so long. So they do look at tapering and using things like a pain pump that offers lower doses of medicine, or they're looking at spinal cord stimulators or other things to help with pain management.
Okay.
But
Not
there
as
is
simple.
more of a challenge with
Okay.
people who have been on the opioids for a long time versus our members with new claims who are
Trying to stay
aware
off.
and stay
Trying to
off
stay
of it,
off.
exactly.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, next item, summary of expenditures. Welcome.
Hello, Stacy Jones, Fpdr Finance Manager. I try to find something exciting to tell you guys about every month, or every 2 months. There isn't much here. The only kind of interesting thing I'll draw your attention to, well, first is that we have the title of our graph wrong. It says fiscal year 17-18, and it should say fiscal year 18-19. Also, I will talk to my staff about making these fonts larger. I have a hard time reading it myself, so we will work on that. But the second line under revenues, if you can read it, is taxes. And if you look at the September payment, we got $3.8 million in taxes in September, which is a really unusually large payment for September. And that's our share of the Comcast property tax settlement. If folks, I'm sure Chair Cooperman knows about it. I don't know if you all have read about it. But the state settled a long-running lawsuit with Comcast that related to many taxation issues, but including property taxes. So we got a lot of property taxes this quarter. Everything else looks fairly routine, but if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Just stay here because we're getting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So the next item is the 2019 board meeting schedule.
Yep. It's proposed, it's pretty much the same as it always has been. So in January, it's going to be the actuarial valuation levy analysis, which it's done every 2 years. I think you'd heard the auditor say every 5 years. It's done every 2 years, so that will be reported in January. Stacy will be up and doing her budget approval presentation for you. And general business at this point, I don't think we have anything there. There may be some stuff there. March, we moved it up 1 week because March 26th is during the Portland Public Schools spring break, and traditionally our trustees didn't want to meet that week, so we moved it up to the 19th. Interesting, so we'll do the Fpdr 2 benefit adjustment, the annual adjustment discussion there in March. Even though it becomes effective in July, we do it in March just in case there are some issues and it has to spill over into May. We haven't had to do that for a few years, but in the past, it usually took 2 months to get through that. We are going to do a medical marijuana presentation on March 19th, how that impacts and what may or may, how it impacts the Fpdr plan. And so we'll bring that up with you. So May will be tax anticipation notes. July will be just general business. State of Fpdr in September. November, okay, this time the 26th is Thanksgiving week, so again, we're going to bump it up a week early, so we're not meeting during Thanksgiving week. General business there.
Great.
And we did double check and triple check my dates. I've been known to get them wrong, but they've been double and triple checked this time.
Okay. And you'll send out meeting invites to us? Great, thank you.
So I'm going to assume that you agree to this. I don't know if anybody, okay, so we'll strike proposed off it and republish it for you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so FPDNR updates. Got 3 or 4 items on this one. The first one is Stacy.
So we just wanted to let the board know that we issued some additional retroactive payments to our fire members in the last 2 weeks. You guys might all recall that in February, we issued about $300,000 in retroactive payments when the fire contract was finally finally implemented. And a portion, one provision in that contract was to increase longevity pay, which is additional pay that members with a certain number of years of service get. The old structure was 2% of top step firefighter pay at 15 years, 4% at 20 years, 6% at 25 years. That increased to 3%, 5%, and 7% respectively. And there was also 1% is now being paid to all fire PFFA employees with 10 years of service. So that additional longevity pay provision, when it went into effect, was in dispute. The city said that it would go into effect on December 29th, which is the day that the arbitrator's order was issued and the contract was in place. But PFFA grieved that, and the arbitrator an arbitrator recently ordered that the city backdate that longevity pay increase to July 1, 2016. So we had to pay retroactive payments to our FPDR1 retirees and beneficiaries because their benefits are a % of current top step firefighter pay, and now we needed to pay that back to July 1, 2016. We also needed to issue retroactive payments to most of the folks who had received disability benefits. Folks with less than 10 years of service didn't get anything, but folks with 10 years and more did. We also had to recalculate final pay for some FPDR2 retirees, folks who had retired after July 1, 2016. So we got all those out the door in a couple of weeks, but it was an additional $200,000 that we paid out to about 350 people. So that brings kind of the grand total for the PFFA contract retroactive payments for FPDR to about $500,000. And we are still processing a few more payments to the estates of some deceased FPDR1 members. I just wanted to let the board know about that. Any questions?
And you had budgeted for that, hadn't you, most of it?
We had not budgeted for the longevity increase to be effective July 1, 2016, because the city had told us it would be effective when the contract went into place, but I have no concerns about covering that within our existing budget.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay. Another update. In January 22, 2019, the Oregon Legislature starts its long session. And that session will go through June 30 of 2019. We will be closely monitoring all the bills to determine what bills, if any, may have an impact on FPDR, FPDR fund, or any of the FPDR members. And as we go through that process, I'll provide you updates at the January, March, and May board meetings. If there's any urgent thing in between, you may see an email from me advising you of what's coming on. It's the same thing same service we've done every year, that they do it even for the long and the short sessions. There is one legislation that we know of that will be introduced that will impact FPDR. It's called the Post-Traumatic Stress Injury Occupational Disease Presumption. This is for any public safety employee who suffers an injury from post-traumatic stress or post-traumatic stress injury. They will be perceived as a presumption, which means it'll be assumed to be work-related and it'll provide some level of proof to that this will probably be done of clear and convincing evidence that it is not work-related. Most claims, when you do a regular disability claim, it's up to the member to show that the disability claim is work-related. Presumption flips that and makes it FPDR's job to show that it is not disability-related. And this will probably have a high level of clear and convincing evidence that it is not work-related to overcome. This is, like I say, this will be an Oregon workers' compensation change. It will be written. It has been confirmed with me to people who have seen the draft of this that FPDR will be considered part of that statute. It's the same type of approach that was used for the firefighter cancer claims 10 or so years ago when they came through. All workers' compensation legislation is reviewed by the Workers' Compensation Management Labor Advisory Committee. It's a group of people from unions and employers that get in and talk about it and hash all the issues out. And these are people very knowledgeable of the workers' compensation system. They try to do it without the politics, but they do represent their particular members, so they hash through the issues and come up with a recommendation to support or not support a bill as a committee as a whole, or they may come up with additional recommended amendments to that bill. So the legislature defers to them to hash out a lot of the details with it that they are not expert at, and then it comes into is introduced into the legislative committees, and there will be maybe some more amendments at that time. MLOC, their first meeting discussing this will be December 3rd. I will attend that MLOC committee and potentially provided some input on that. I have not seen the legislation yet. It has not been finalized, so it has not been formally published. With that. And so we have one last topic under this. It's a presentation. Let me slide over here. I'm going to have to do my own slide. With it. Okay, so last time we had a discussion, state of FPDR, the wellness programs, and so I followed up with Chief Myers and said, let's talk about this some more. And he set up a presentation with Dr. Kuehl and Chief Burns. Dr. Kuehl is a doctor. He is a professor of medicine at OHSU. He's their Chief Health Promotion and Sports Medicine. He's a director of their Human Performance Laboratory. So he's quite versed in a lot of health and wellness type programs. He did work with PFFR on what is called the FLAME study in 1999. You'll see the next couple slides will briefly review that. So Dr. Kuehl in his presentation, he did state that he has studies and has reviewed studies that show that general wellness programs are not successful in reducing healthcare costs. His point is that the wellness programs that do reduce healthcare costs are those that are tailored and comprehensive and target certain high-risk employees, such as firefighters. So again, the general programs that the city of Portland have, he has seen the same studies I have and probably additional more that say they do not reduce healthcare costs. He says in order to do that, you have to target a plan to a particular, and customize it to a particular group of employees. He says, in addition, these successful comprehensive wellness programs have management or in Fire Bureau command staff involvement, and they highly encourage or require employee participation. With it, you need to have employees participate with it. It can't be totally optional with that. And he does say that a good program, we heard a lot about the NFPA 1582 medical exam. He says that's often a part of at least the initial analysis that goes into when these programs are started with that. And he's a very, sorry. Okay, so the reason for the plans, and this is Dr. Kuehl, this is actually, I cannibalized his slide to do this. So he feels that a comprehensive medical program for firefighters is important because you need to identify and treat high incidence of illness and disease associated specifically with this occupation. He says in the short term, you can reduce injury rates and costs of workers' compensation and disability claims. In the long term, you can reduce some of the big health issues like cardiovascular disease, cancer, and some of the early disability and health care costs. So the idea is to reduce, short term, you can reduce the number of claims and the duration of the claims. Long term, you can hopefully reduce some of the major health problems that people experience that can lead to a claim or can lead to disability with that. And so for firefighters, the benefit is to retire healthy. And that's pretty straightforward of what to do. And then the management is that you get a positive ORI with cost savings. So you invest in this program up front, you have fewer people on disability, so therefore you should get a payback that you could use elsewhere. Unfortunately, how FPDR plan is built is if we see fewer claims, that monies go back into the fund. They don't go into the general fund or the Fire Bureau's budget, which is sort of what this ROI goes for. So if you pay fewer workers' compensation claims, that gives you more money in your fire budget to buy better apparatus or better training for other things. But unfortunately, that doesn't happen the way our program is done. I want to give you an example of something that Dr. Kuehl had put together. It was a study, but it was a study designed to test how well you can make a comprehensive wellness program work. And so on the next slide, we'll go here. It's the FLAME study. There you can see where they got the acronym from, Promoting Healthy Lifestyles, Alternative Models Effect. So this was conducted with Portland Fire and some other fire bureaus throughout the state in 1991 to 2001. It was to assess and compare two means to promote healthy lifestyles. In other words, they set up two different type of wellness programs here. One was employee controlled, the other was controlled by an outside consultant. I think the general result from it is both were much better than having no program in place. They did actually say the employee-led program worked better, but it's not what I was looking for when I was looking through this study. So the study, as I said, did conclude that participating in the intervention promoted healthy behaviors. No matter which study you did, you got people with healthier behaviors. Improvements were seen in exercise, support, daily servings of fruit and vegetables. That was one of their major success measurements. Diet, body mass index, and oxygen uptake. And so it really goes to show, too, when you're running these wellness programs, you have to define the data that you want to use and measure so you can determine if the wellness program is effective. Now what they did, so I'll flip over here to the next slide. So in 2005, they came back, and because the assumption was that Portland Fire was continuing this wellness program on their own. And so they came back, and the goal this time was to evaluate the impact on the workers' compensation claims and medical costs. So the first part of this study was to say, does it work to have a structured wellness program, and which structure works the best? Now they're coming back in, well, let's see what the impact of this wellness program was. So they reviewed the data from 1998 through 2004. They were looking at annual workers' compensation costs and incurred medical costs. And so here's what they found. was that 35% of self-reported days off, a reduction of 35% in self-reported days off, 36% reduction in reportable injuries, those that required medical evaluation, and 57% reduction in cost of injury claims. Now, this is how they stated it in their findings with it. I found no record that FPDNR was involved at all in this part of the study as far as even giving data or helping them evaluate data. And my predecessor was pretty thorough in documenting stuff. It's not to say that we didn't, but I find no record, and he makes no mention of it, that he got any data from us. So that was, and that's just a side input on the study. So the idea behind why I brought up the FLAME study is you can see results from a targeted, tailored program to a particular group of people. And targeted and tailored means it fits what these people do, it measures what these people do and what's important to it. So that differentiates it from the wellness programs that the city of Portland has and that I had listed in the presentation. So after this presentation we had with Dr. Kuehl, I was talking with Chief Burns. Okay, so what are the next steps that we're going to do with wellness? So Portland, PFNR, and that should be an F, not Portland Parks and Rec. Anyway, so that should be, the Fire Bureau wants to create a comprehensive medical wellness program based upon the studies done by Dr. Kuehl. There's, okay. Sorry. I don't have somebody here to help me out. Okay, so there's no details to what they want this program to look like at this time. That's one of the things that they have to do. I volunteered to assist whatever they need to do to help create the program, how they want to, what data they want to need or what they want to use or analyze that data to measure success for that. And there's a chance that the Fire Bureau may come in and ask for some funds to do this. Similar, the same way that we had talked about before. Mm-hmm. So again, we'll help them complete the request when we get to that point, and then it will be presented to you. One thing that we are going to stress as we go ahead, we have the transitional duty program. We talked about that in the state of FPDR, where if the Bureau, whether it be police or fire, takes somebody back to a light duty job for a limited period of time, we will pay that Bureau 75% of that person's salary as an incentive for the Bureau to take them back in that job. We've seen, unfortunately, for the Fire Bureau for the past 3 or 4 years, a significant decline in the use of this program. And we've been talking with them, hey, this is a program that's well established, it's proven, let's start using it. So that is one thing that we've brought up a couple times with Chief Russ, and we'll be bringing it up with Chief Burns. Also, hey, you've got this is in place. You don't have to go through a lot to figure out how to use this and do it. I don't know why there's been a decline in its usage. Because right now, of the traditional duty costs we pay out, 75% go to police, 25% go to fire. And that should be close to 50-50 with that. So we'll be bringing that up as these further discussions go on. Now, one thing that we say here is there needs to be one cohesive effort, because you've had one presentation earlier today, and now you hear that Chief Burns is looking to go a different way. The Fire Bureau is going to have to get involved and talk about it. I don't think FPDR could be funding 2 separate programs. I think the Fire Bureau has to step up and say what program or programs do they want. And they're going to have to get more involved with the earlier program that we had to do that. So that's something that I'll be bringing up when I work through both of these parties. You guys need to come up with a uniform approach to this. And if the Fire Bureau wants to go one direction or the other direction, they need to make that decision. I just don't think we should be funding 2 disparate programs that maybe aren't syncing up together under the Fire Bureau. But that's just my opinion. We'll let these processes work their way through. I'll be asking these questions of the Fire Bureau, and then we'll be bringing packages to you for review in the future with this. And there is no timeline set for this additional work that Chief Burns was talking about. Mm-hmm. And we'll just make ourselves available when he would like to do that.
So Sam, I'm glad you said it was going to be comprehensive, because that's exactly what I was thinking. We have these 2 similar proposals here. But we are still leaving out the police, and I'd like to, when we talk about this further, think about how we are going to involve the police as well.
We've made invitations out to police. I mean, this really has, I will give fire credit, though they haven't been using transitional duty. They're talking about it with us. Police isn't. Police heavily uses the transitional duty. They have 20-plus positions available to be used. And they use more than that just for FPDR, but that's one thing that they use very heavily with it. So they have a lot of stuff, but we've tried to initiate talks with them, and as soon as we can get somebody to hear us, we'll go.
About wellness?
About wellness or any type of program designed to reduce disability.
Well, it's very ironic that we just developed a wellness program.
Yep.
I think that step will go further.
Yep.
There's a new program starting, so I think
Okay.
it'll go a lot further. And I would agree that I think it's just, instead of a PF&R, I think it should just be an FPD&R, all-encompassing type of program.
We will do this. See, part of what we've done with these types of programs in the past, and it's not to say that we can't change, they've been initiated by the bureaus, and the bureaus come in to do this. We have been, especially with transitional duty, reaching out consistently to the bureaus. What are you going to do? We've got these opportunities. Very responsive on the police side. They went from 10 positions to 20 positions about a year and a half ago. Part because we've been pushing, let's do it. We're getting interest from fire, but we're not getting, I think there's some behind the scenes stuff that is not clicking to do it. We've offered to work with them and how to get this program going with it in more depth, but a lot of it we can try to spark interest, but if we don't get command staff buy-in and participation, we can't go very far with these programs.
Well, we don't, I guess maybe I'm thinking about this differently. If FPD&R comes up with a program that is beneficial to the members, we don't have to have the members come ask us to initiate those ideas. We can come up with our own ideas.
Well,
and we can have programs like this set up for their option to use. Not necessarily we have to say, well, if you're not going to come and ask us for us to move forward, we're not going to do it.
That's a different approach to it, but part of the challenge is with any program we set up, we have to have buy-in from the Bureau.
Right, and I can't see
And that's where the challenge is right now. We're trying to do the initiation of discussions with them.
Right.
The Bureau's only going so far, because we can set up this beautiful program, but if police says, oh, we don't want to participate, the program's not going to work.
Right,
Same
and
thing
I
with-
totally agree. I guess this is more of a broad thing is, I like the fact that we're actually making an initiative to move forward on something that has a positive impact on the members, because this can be ever-reaching, right? Not just this program, but other programs that might come before us. We don't have to ask somebody, hey, come please ask us to do this. We can move forward on ideas that we have. And I think that could be something that we could be an active board rather than a reactive board, making them come ask us.
Well, we have it. We do have one program in place, and we're trying to get, and that's a transitional duty. That's been a big savings. There is one particular issue that we have to watch, because FPDR's funds are very controlled on what we can spend it for. And that's the one line that fits in the charter is any project that we do along this health has to directly impact or reduce our disability costs. So that's something that we have to be continuing to think about is as we do, how's this going to reduce disability costs? Other than that, if that isn't one of the themes or the main intents of the program, we can't pay for it per the charter.
And I totally agree.
And so that, and it's not saying we didn't do it, but when we develop a program, it has to have that intention of reducing disability costs versus increasing general wellness is great, but it has to translate back into how's that definitely going to be shown in the bottom line of disability savings.
I think that's great, and for the other members or the other trustees and the chair, personal knowledge, obviously they have studies following the fire, but personal knowledge, because of contractual issues that the Portland Police Bureau entered with the city for wellness programs. Personal knowledge, I know 3 candidates specifically that benefited from that and have reduced their disability, have realized that they have had health issues that they didn't even know existed, all because of preventive type of health. Yeah. And it is a wave of the future. I think it's the definite way to go. I think cost savings, as they continue, or as the years go by, I think cost savings will definitely be.
Well, and that's the point, is we're going to have to figure out how to measure that. And that, as we move, we have to figure out how to measure it. That's the challenge for supporting some of the things, is we're going to have to show how will this do it? I mean, and it gets hard. Well, gee, maybe fewer heart attacks in 20 years or 10 years from now. That's stretching for what the intent is of Fpdr having to pay for it. I mean, again, we're having a pretty strict interpretation of what the policy says. But I don't want, and maybe sounding negative, I think there's some opportunities that are out there. I do think we can come up with ideas ourselves, but I'm fairly convinced the ideas must have buy-in, complete buy-in by command staff of both bureaus. And if we can't get to that point, like I say right now, we're working hard with the command staff at fire to use the transitional duty, and that's an established, well-recognized program, and it's been proven to work, and we're trying to get them to use it more. And if we can't get them to use an obvious, well-developed program right now, we're going to have to work that much harder if we come in to add them with a new program.
I appreciate, it sounds like you're receptive to some of this stuff, but I would like to see the fund kind of moving in a different direction to maybe being a little more proactive on this. I feel a lot of, we need this, we need this, we need this. I think we can interpret a lot of the stuff in the rules, in the charter, with good intent. And I think these wellness programs and these things that are going to benefit the fund, or hopefully benefit the fund, could come from the fund. And I know we only have limited staff, just like at the fire department and the police department. We don't have a big group of people that can think up all this stuff. And it's just firefighters like Kyle that just came in here, brought something. We don't have a division or a section that works on this stuff. So I think you have some very smart people that this is their specialty. This is what they do. They work with disability and people that are injured and trying to get them back to work, and probably go to a lot of conferences and talk to a lot of people in the industry that have some good ideas. So I would like to see the fund come up with some good ideas and maybe present them to the fire bureau, to the police bureau, to us, along with the stuff that we get, and work together and kind of have the same common goal. Because, and if it doesn't produce fruit and it's not saving any money, then we get rid of it and we try something else. But there is a lot of good information that if we dig around and we look for it, we find it. I think we could come up with something pretty good for our members that would, save the fund some money and have healthier employees and just people that are, contributing more to the bureaus and the citizens, and it's a win-win. So I would just like to see a more positive, maybe receptive and more inclusive, feel come from the fund. That's just kind of how I feel.
Okay.
Thanks.
Are there future meeting agenda item updates that you want to share with us?
I think we just went over that when we did
Okay.
with the schedule, so there's nothing
Great.
else there.
Yes.
John Stevens has asked if he can have a few minutes to address the
Yes, we've covered everything on the agenda. I have a 4:00 meeting across the street that I need to get to, so I have only just a few minutes. I might hand off the gavel to somebody else to close the meeting, but I'll say that we have 3 minutes. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you.
This is covering the issue of our disability being non-taxable.
Can you look at it? Do you need that while you're?
No, it's yours.
Okay.
There's an extra one.
I got
I'm
it.
not going to read it.
Okay.
I think an extra.
Oh, you get next one?
Okay. I'd like
may I
Kathy
make
to
just
have
a-
a copy too, for the record.
Yes, yes.
Okay,
May I make a quick comment?
quick.
My desire is to fix this so that we're all happy with the outcome, and also that it meets the intent of the law, and that is to have equal benefits. And there's a law, as you, I'm sure, are aware of, equal to or better than, that says our pension system has to be equal to or better than that benefits provided by PERS, okay? And we've actually failed that. In 1990, we didn't pass the test. A lot of people didn't know that. It was actually kept quiet. But it's a fact, and there was an exemption that was created to allow Portland to continue operating outside of the PERS system. But one of those provisions was that any additional benefits made by PERS would have to be added to the Portland system. And in 2006, as Mr. Jimkowski mentioned, there was a police officer that questioned why his pension became taxable at 30 years under PERS. And they went to court over that, and there was a settlement partway through, and PERS felt that he had a legitimate legal argument, and they did not want to fight it. And so they settled. And from that point on, disability pensions became non-taxable under PERS. Okay, Portland had the option of doing the same thing at that time. They did not do so. And we have a number of people, firemen and policemen, who are on disability. They're paying about a third of their pensions out in taxes. And it's against the law. The city has been able to operate under this since 2006. And it needs to be corrected. And I hope that it can be done in a collaborative way, and that the retired associations, both police and fire, could work with that principle, and we would modify it together. Nancy Hartline in this letter says that you have to go back to the voters. I question that, because I raised the issue about the widows receiving a pension when their husband died who was on disability, and I said that at that time, that should have been a transferable pension, non-taxable to the widow. The pension board argued with me about it. 2 years later, there was a settlement in San Francisco Ninth Circuit Court, and at that time, they ruled that a pension that is received by the widow would retain the same status, and so they corrected that. Portland made an administrative change in the rules, and they changed ours just like that. It didn't go to the voters. And what I'm saying now is it doesn't have to go that far to make the changes that are necessary for the law. If a disability pension is non-taxable under PERS, it should be the same way for us. And I think there's a lot of legal precedent that would establish that. And if the pension board wants to engage voluntarily in seeking a solution, we can do that. If not, it's going to have to go to court, because it's just too big of an impact on our disabled people. And I hope you understand that I'm trying to come in the spirit of conciliation and working with you. I really am. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Bill.
Thank you. Any other questions or discussion? Agenda items? Okay, then for Jennifer's behalf, I'll adjourn the meeting.
All right.